Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Pro Wrestling World Talks with Dan and Mac.
Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, whatever time you're listening. You're listening to Pro Wrestling World Talks. I am your host, Daniel Burke, and I am always joined by my co-host, Mac. And it is a very special episode this week. And it is not because of the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs are no longer undefeated in the NFL. It is because of the fact
it's also because of that.
Well, that is a very good time, even though they lost to Buffalo. So now I got to hear Bills fans be like, "Rrr, rrr, rrr." That's the only hard part about the whole thing, because it's like, yeah, the Chiefs lost, but it was to the Bills. And I really don't like their fans. I think they're a bunch of morons. Especially the one guy who
I know.
Yeah, no, right? Any organization, any fan group that calls himself a mafia, but literally has done nothing as far as power control. Like if I'm surprised not some friends from New Jersey would go over there and talk to them and be like, you're not a mafia. In fact, you got to understand something. There is no mafia. So you calling yourself the mafia.
I'm in the waste management business.
Yes, exactly. I'm in the waste management business. And sometimes I do some things with illegal gambling, but that's it. Like, there is no mafia.
We're not supposed to talk about this with outsiders.
Exactly. But no, the reason why this episode is so special, and also we're doing this in post, so that's why it's not in on the intro.
You weren't supposed to tell them that.
But no, the fact is that tonight's episode, we were able to get for a few hours, and perhaps one of our best interviews that we've ever done on this program, Scott Hudson, of course, known for his time in World Championship Wrestling between 1995 and 2001 till their closure. We also talked about his time in Global Wrestling Federation, which they were on ESPN daily in the early 90s. They were a very influential promotion. Of course, they were on ESPN after AWA was on there, and then after the USWA was on there. So we talked a little bit about that. We also talked about Mean Gene stories, Bobby Heenan stories, so much. It was an absolute fantastic. So at this time, we are going to take you to that interview right now. So what have you been doing now lately?
Well, I had my real job. I always did wrestling as a hobby, and I retired from that April 1 of last year. So for a year and a half, now a month in after that, I've just been retired.
Oh, okay.
I worked 42 years and at that career, and now I'm just sitting out at the lake all day with my wife, and our daughter moved back home when she finished up school, and now getting her, taking that next step out. And so it's
right.
The three of us back at the house here at the lake.
That's good. I mean, that's good. Nice. That you're able to kind of just say, detach from everything.
I mean, you're young, so you're in the middle of it. But when you're working, you really don't think about it. And I didn't think about it at all. I was like, I got to go to work today, like everybody else in the world. And then when I got closer to retirement, I was thinking, like, what am I going to do? And I went to a friend of mine who had retired 4 years before me. And I said, okay, I'm getting close. What's it like? What am I going to do when I retire? And he said, sleep. And I said, no, I get plenty of sleep. It's one of those things, I sleep 8.5 hours a night. And he goes, no, you're going to sleep. You're going to sleep all the time, and you're going to wake up and then go back to sleep. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's bullshit. I'm not going to do that. And you can ask my wife, who's sitting right over there on the other end of this big couch. I slept today until like 12:15.
Oh God, I'm jealous.
And for me, when I was working, sleeping in was sleeping until 7:00.
Yeah, no, that seems to be the going norm. I know some people like my parents that can get up at. My mom is an interesting case in the sense of that, like, she can go to bed at like 11 o'clock and then get up at 4:30 in the morning. It's like,
Hell with that.
my body is like, no.
No, when I would sleep in, well, when I was working, I would get up. I have to get up at like 5:30 in the morning,
Right.
to go hit the gym or drive to work and be there at 7. So I would go to sleep at like 8:30. So I wasn't crazy, to stay up until 1 in the morning and then get up at 4. But no, I go to bed at 10 o'clock and sleep until 10 o'clock. And so Keith, my friend, was exactly right. You're going to sleep. I thought he was out of his mind, and he was right.
That's something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. It's nice. It's nice.
Next 20 years or so.
Except I dream about work.
Oh no.
I mean,
that's the worst.
Yeah, I asked my.
I escape from this.
I tell my wife all the time, if I don't tell you what I dreamed about flying an airplane or playing football, which that's just two things just are beat in my head.
Right.
So if I dream and I can't think of something fun to dream about, that's the two things I'll dream about. But then of late, especially in the last year and a half, I dream I'm back at work. I'm back in my office at the courthouse and, managing people and figuring out a budget and all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting but it's also interesting how wrestling was kind of the hobby, but the main job is everything else.
I'll dream about wrestling like once every 6 months, and it's not good. I'll dream that I get called by the WWE or AEW, and they say, we need you, something's happened, and we need you to do the show tonight. Can you be in Jacksonville or Orlando? And I'm like, I don't know the talent. I don't know the stories. Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. Just get on the road. And, and so it's not fun. Like, the real thing was great fun, but the dream is always this nightmare of being thrown back into the deep end of the pool.
Do you think if somebody did call your phone, though, that you would answer and be like, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow? Or is it just going to be like...
That's not gonna I was like, I've got 10 people that could do a better job than me that want to do it, which is two things that don't apply to me. So, no, let me give you some names and numbers, and that'd be the end.
It's funny because when I was watching WCW, I was seeing you on there. I was like, I want to be in that spot. I want that spot. And it's funny that, like, you're as 25 years so later, you're just like, no, I don't want to get back. I'm done.
No, I wouldn't change it. I mean, I had a blast, and I enjoyed every bit of it. But I'm 60. I just turned 60 years old. Yeah, and no, I don't want to go stand in airports for 6 hours and get rental cars and yell at rental car agents and fight with a hotel clerk and watch Bobby Heenan fall over a floor buffer at the Jefferson in Richmond, Virginia for 2 hours. No, I don't want to do that. I want to stay here. I love my house. I love my wife. I love my daughter.
Were a few cocktails involved in this? What
was that?
The Bobby Heenan.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll tell you that story. He was the greatest.
Yes. My co-host Mac has joined us.
Super.
Yeah, so he's going to be kind of chiming in as well. But I am so happy that he came on and did this. I know it's been kind of you've been talking to Dave, so it's been kind of like going back and forth, and he's just been like, God, I hope he comes on. So we were both kind of crossing our fingers, just like, all right, well, maybe it'll happen.
I was I had the reason this worked so well last night when we were doing the tech rehearsal.
Yeah.
A friend of mine from WCW named Christine Johnson, you don't know her, she was behind the scenes, is now a professor at a college north of Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
And she had a couple of folks in her class, it's like a sports media class, wanted to do research into what we do. And she said, is it okay if I have them call you and talk about what you did? I said, of course, that's fine.
Yeah.
So we did that, and we did like a little tech rehearsal last week. And thank God we did, because I didn't have the software. I had to download the app. The settings weren't right. And it took about 20 minutes to get it right, to get it set up. But once we got it set up, it was just like this, click, and we're in. So that's why last night went so well, because I had worked it out with those kids from the graduate school last week. And it makes all the difference in the world when you just an ounce of preparation is a pound of cure. That's an old cliche, but it's true.
Right. Because you mentioned, speaking of someone behind the scenes from like WCW, like when you mentioned Christine Johnson,
right?
Did you get a call from Vice for the Death of WCW documentary?
No.
It's kind of surprising.
No. Well, I'm honestly, the best thing in the world is for people to forget that I existed. I want people to think, like, when they see this podcast, this interview that we're doing, they go like, "Oh, remember that guy? He's got a gray beard now. Yeah, I remember him. Oh my God, I forgot about him." That's what I want. That's the greatest compliment somebody can pay me, because we're not supposed to be what people remember.
Right.
We're supposed to make you think Page and Goldberg and Sting and Flair and Arn and Savage and Hogan and Nash and all of that. We're supposed to sell those guys and Skittles, but we're not supposed to sell ourselves. So I want to be like, oh God, that guy. Yeah. Wonder whatever happened to him. Is he dead? Is he in prison? No, he's on the lake.
It's funny because with wrestling fans and the inner, especially too with like my inner workings of my friends, my inner circle, we always remember random people, especially in the wrestling business. We'll just be like, remember Todd Pettengill? Yeah,
Oh.
Todd Pettengill. And then we'll remember, and then somebody will throw out Scott Hudson and we'll be like, oh yeah, Scott was great. Like, it was always like, it seems that's what it's like, I feel like, in the wrestling community anyways, where it's just like, you remember the name, sometimes you remember the voice, and it just all of a sudden it just clicks, especially too with, I think, because nostalgia has really been big now for like so long with the wrestling business, because it's like everybody wants to talk about WCW, everybody wants to talk about ECW still, and it's just like, because I remember when those companies still closed, and it was just like, it felt like it was yesterday, and now everybody is just. What's funny to me, and because you worked for WCW for so long, at least for that, because what was it, between 95 and 2001 to the end?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So what's funny is that people remember it fondly, but there was a lot of times that even Eric Bischoff has admitted this, and I think one of the documentaries that they've done is just like how many times I sat there watching a pay-per-view and watching the main event, and I'm watching the finish, and I'm just like, I'm just, what happened?
Yeah.
Like these big angles, and it's not just Starrcade 90s, because everybody looks at Sting and Hogan, and they're just
That's
like,
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's the one they look at, but it's just like,
we had a year-long build-up for that. That was tough.
Did that, because being there watching that, did you watch that moment and just think to yourself, we just hit the iceberg?
A little bit, because, and I don't know if we're rolling or not, but if we are not, that's fine. I'll tell the same story. That's why Eric, to me, is a genius. I know he gets a lot of heat, but I would, to this day, and as we're sitting here talking, it's November the 19th, 2024. I would still, like when you said if somebody called me, would I go? If it were Eric, I would go.
No, I love Eric. I've always I've always thought that Eric got shouldered the blame for that. Like, oh, he was ATM Eric. It's like they wouldn't have been in the position that they were in without him.
That's correct.
Like, that's what people need to realize. Like, they would
what
not be in the
What
position.
Eric did when we're talking about Starrcade 97, he understood how the business was evolving at the time. And he could see that what Sting was bringing to the table was, not exactly what the business was going to be. Sting was still, number one, he's a fantastic worker. He's a great guy.
Yes.
All of that. Not the greatest promo of all time.
No.
So when the business started evolving to where Diesel and Razor Ramon were just characters that could be interchanged with Rick Bogner and Glenn Jacobs in the WWE, it was like, okay,
Right.
We've got to be a lot more real about this. And the real Sting isn't going to be that interesting without the spiky blonde hair and the neon colors and stuff. That's not going to work anymore. So what can we do with Sting? And Eric had the idea, and with Scott Hall, God rest his soul, helping out with the character development, said, what's Sting's two biggest weaknesses? Well, his promos aren't that great, and unless he's in the ring with Flair, his work is maybe slightly above average. So how about this? We don't let him work or talk for a year, and he'll be more over than he's ever been in his life, just because he's Sting, because he's got
Right.
charisma. And then with Scott making the character development of turning him into the Crow, the Brandon Lee character, you saw what he became. And then when we built up to Starrcade 97 with him and Hogan, that should have been rock and stone cold for us. It
Right.
should have propelled us to the next level. And in fact, it brought us so far down, all because of Hogan's unwillingness to follow the booking that was laid out. And, I don't have a lot of use for people that don't follow the booking. I mean, we all have a boss. And if his contract said he got creative control, then so be it. But Hogan's refusal to do what was, to coin a phrase from Hunter, what was best for business, it wasn't the hitting of the iceberg, but it was the setting sail from Southampton for WCW.
That's a good analogy to it. That's a really excellent analogy to it.
That'll cost you $40. Thank you. Venmo me.
See, when you started there in 95, did you think that they were going to ascend within 2 years, where they were going to be the most dominant company on the planet?
Of course not. Nope.
Because 95, they were still, they were going to get Nitro. The TNT deal was pretty much, it was on the horizon.
No, well, we had Nitro.
Right.
We had it was going. But
Right.
it was good. It's a good show. But
Still had Dungeon of Doom.
Yeah, it was a lot of that, a lot of Steve McMichael with his dog. No offense to Steve, who's a great guy, but that wasn't going to work. But they had stumbled out of the gate with Nitro, and it was working. So no, you could see there was certainly the foundation for something to take off. And it was all because of Eric that it did. Again, I'm not ever going to knock Eric. He was the genius. He was the madman at the controls. He was the man behind the curtain in the land of Oz.
Was he more accessible those early years? I think his later years, he was probably a little bit more withdrawn, probably as the company started to really kind of get cooking.
Honestly, I never couldn't get access to Eric when I wanted it.
Mm.
If I needed to talk to him about something, or if he wanted to talk to me, which was, rare, it was just a phone call or go meet in the office at the building. But again, I can count on two hands the times I've had when in the WCW days, the times I've had conversations with. Just didn't happen. After that, I've talked to him a ton, but a lot of the guys were coming to him with complaints about money, complaints about
creative
talent, complaints about days off,
Yep.
all of that. And so he's like, oh, it's him again. tell him I'm out of the office. That kind of stuff. I never had that problem because I didn't complain. I was still just a mark. Still am a mark. I was thrilled to be there. I couldn't. Every time I went, I was in shock. They still let me in the building.
Yeah, that's the way I would probably perceive that at some point for myself. If I ever worked for a company, I'd be like, well, the key still works. I'm doing something right.
Right. You had that little badge gimmick, you wear your lanyard and you run it in front of this thing. Make sure it still turns green when I get there. If it does, I guess I'm
beep, beep.
still
All right, cool.
Still employed. Yeah.
I mean, because so did you grow up in Georgia? Were you born in Georgia?
Yes.
Okay.
Born, raised right here the whole time.
So you probably grew up with like Georgia Championship and
sure.
All
right.
So
here's the thing. Here's the thing. I grew up. I grew up in 1970. No, I grew up, but in 1970, I started watching wrestling at my grandfather's house over in Cuthbert, Georgia. And you can look it up on the map. It's a little tiny, tiny town where I was born. And that's where my grandfolks lived. And we lived up in Thomaston, and that's about an hour and change down there. We'd go visit your grandparents like you do. And on the weekends, because I'm in school, my sister's in school, my dad's working. And if we came on a Saturday at 4 o'clock on Saturday on Channel 3, leave Granddaddy alone because he's going to watch wrestling on Channel 3 out of Columbus. They had a live Georgia Championship Wrestling show from the Columbus Municipal Auditorium every Saturday afternoon, live, broadcast live from the auditorium. Didn't air anywhere else except Columbus. So that's when I first started watching wrestling. So I started with that. Then I'm like, this is great. And I love my grandfather. So anything he likes, I like. And so then I figured out that it was on Channel 11 in Atlanta at 11 o'clock on Friday nights. This was what eventually moved over to Channel 17 on then WTCG and then WTBS and the TBS network. I got that. And then going to see my other grandparents in South Georgia, I got to see Gulf Coast. I got to see Florida Championship.
Oh, you got everything.
Then when we moved to South Georgia, I got Mid-Atlantic out of the television station in Savannah. So I got Florida, Gulf Coast, Georgia from Atlanta, Georgia from Columbus, Georgia from Macon, which had its own show on WMAZ, and then Mid-Atlantic out of Savannah. So I got all of that in the 1970s. I was like, what's that? 7 hours a week of the best indie stuff ever. And then you get, at some point you get Southwest with Joe Blanchard on USA, and then we get Watts on TBS, and then we get Vince on WWOR out of Secaucus, and then AWA on ESPN, and then eventually to where there was, 12 hours of wrestling a week that I'm getting to see. It was heaven. Yeah,
it's kind of like how it is now. I mean, considering it's Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Impact's on Thursday. So you're looking at 5 days a week. And then, of course, you got the PLEs or the pay-per-views on the weekends. Right. So and now with streaming, my God. Yeah.
But now it's for granted that you can watch 30 hours of wrestling a week. But back then, this was all pulling stuff out of the air. And then cable wasn't, the old Springsteen song of 57 channels and nothing on, and you think 57 channels, and now there's like 657 channels, literally. So back then,
you go on YouTube, it could be millions.
Yeah. But back then, it was something else to get that much wrestling, and I was number one. Then I started trading tapes with folks from around the country because I had so much, and then through the Wrestling Observer newsletter and Pro Wrestling Torch.
Oh, were you an Observer member?
Oh, God. Day one. I was right. You can go back and find old Wrestling Observers from like 83, and there's my name covering indie shows in Albany, Georgia, and Valdosta, and Macon, and Tallahassee.
Do you still have a relationship with Dave or not really?
I don't talk to him anymore, but I don't talk to anybody anymore.
Okay.
The last time I saw Dave was at the Starcast show in Chicago, in Rosemont.
Was that 2018-ish?
2018, 2019. It was before the pandemic. That's the last time I talked to him.
Was that after AEW was created, or was that like for All In?
It was at the All In with Cody.
So that was 2018.
Cody and Kenny Omega.
It was Cody and Nick Aldis for the NWA Championship.
Yes, that's right.
Where that
that's
was where
correct.
Cody won, and I think Kenny fought. I think it was Penta or Ray Phoenix.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And what's funny is that I barely remember that show, but I just remember those matchups.
Yeah, that was a fantastic show.
It really was. I mean, and it really did kind of change the industry, at least the last 6 or 7 years, because AEW kind of came out of that and kind of really lit kind of a fire back into the at least professional wrestling, at least for a little bit for them. WWE, I mean, they were really kind of circling towards the drain, at least creatively, for a long time. And then issues happen with certain people. And now we have a new kind of creative direction, which seems to breathe new life into the company. Like, and because now it's what's funny is with them is that their wrestling product is probably the best it's ever been.
I agree.
Because if you go back to the 80s and the 90s, because I got into wrestling in 1991. So, but I knew probably 90, 91, around that area. But I remember distinctly, even when I found out about WCW and I was watching WCW, I knew in like 92, 93 that the in-ring product in WCW was miles ahead of anything that WWF was doing. Miles. They had Brett, that was it. But WCW actually had guys that could work. Like they had Flair, they had, Flair went up to WWE in 91, between 91 and 93. But at the same time, they had Rick Rude, they had Ricky Steamboat. Like the talent was, as far as actual professional wrestlers, was ridiculous.
We had Arn, we had Austin, we had Pillman, Cactus. That was an underrated run.
It really was. I mean, I think it was just a combination of the fact that the business was going through, because Vince was in the midst of the indictment with the federal government with the steroid charges. And then, of course, the Ring Boy scandal, all this kind of negative publicity, I think that was kind of hurting the industry as a whole, which hampered WCW to kind of get out of its way, because I thought 93, they really had a strong year to kind of get them in a direction where they needed to go, which they ended up doing, because a year later they got Hogan. 95, they get Nitro, then you go over, then you join.
I would not put that in third place. That's far down the list. But thank you.
Well, hey, look, I have to look at it from the standpoint of is that you were in a position, I think, that any of us, that wrestling fans and aficionados, or anybody that wants to be in broadcasting, you were in a spot that a lot of people coveted. You were in a spot that, 16, 17 years old when I was watching, that was what I wanted to do when I got into college. Like, I wanted to be in broadcasting, but I wanted to work in professional wrestling. So you were kind of someone that it was just like, well, it wasn't like, well, if he could do it, I could do it.
No, that's fine. That's exactly right. I'll tell you something. Talking about the steroid trial and all that back with Dr. Zahorian and the Ring Boys and all this other stuff in the early 90s. I did an editorial. I can't remember what sheet it was in. And you know what the sheets are, and I think that
the Torch, Observer.
Yeah, but I wrote a thing called, because there was this whole idea that the sheets were killing the wrestling business. I wrote an editorial called "Wrestling is Killing the Sheet Business," because when the sheets first started, I kept thinking, like, it was eye-opening to learn that Nikita Koloff wasn't really Russian, and that Colonel De Beers was really just Ed Wiskowski from Minneapolis.
Right.
That was so cool. And that's what made the sheets fun to me, was to learn that aspect of the business. But now we're dealing with sex scandals and steroid indictments. It's just not fun to write for the sheets anymore, because wrestling is killing the sheet business. And I got a lot of heat for that. Because no, this isn't the wrestling business. Like, well, yeah, it is the wrestling business, because look at the perverts and criminals that are populating the business. When before it used to just be, granted, the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser and guys like that who weren't Sunday school teachers, but they were just tough guys. Now it's criminals. So it's not fun anymore to work for the sheets. And it was a tongue-in-cheek editorial, but in hindsight, it was actually fairly prescient because the business went through that run from the steroid scandal all the way through when Benoit nutted up in 2007. So that was 15 years in those two parameters. And what happened to Chris kind of woke everybody up, and at least that aspect of things changed.
That it was weird, that Donahue episode, the famous one where Vince was on and sitting right next to him was Dave Meltzer.
Right, with Dave Meltzer, yeah.
Meltzer's,
awesome.
Meltzer's in his pullet, which I call a mullet and a perm.
And he had like a double-breasted suit on.
Like he's just, and it's just so odd because Vince is just there and he's got that, the bureaucratic look on his face, and there's just Meltzer just sitting right next to him, and he's just like, man, I don't even want him in here. you got John Arezzi. It was really a real weird cast of characters. You got John Arezzi up there, superstar Billy Graham, Bruno Sammartino. You got Vince. You got Dave Meltzer. Oh, I'm trying to forget who else was. Barry Orton was up there.
Oh, that's right. Barry O.
Tom Cole was not there. Tom Cole, I guess they ended up Tom Cole settled with
and
the
then
company.
He was supposed to be there.
He was supposed to be here.
Oh.
Yeah, and then Murray Hodges was there too. He was that announcer that Vince, they had that face off in that episode too.
So this was like the Hollywood roast of Vince McMahon, or it could have been, if they had let it really go.
Put it on Comedy Central.
Yeah,
let's monetize this. Come on, guys.
Oh gosh.
You didn't start in WCW, which was the weird thing. Not the weird thing, but WCW, that's what people know you for. But you were on ESPN early on because you were also on Global. That started in 90. So
Correct.
that was right after, was that after the USWA kind of left and went back to Memphis?
It was, after the Von Erich implosion, as it were, there were just shards left of wrestling in Dallas, and Jerry Jarrett had tried to put everything back in place, and it just wasn't working. They were losing money bad, and Jerry, again, a genius. I knew him and liked him a great deal, but he's since left us. But he tried, and it just wasn't going to work. So there wasn't anything really left in Dallas. And Joe Pedicino, who I had worked for in Georgia doing the Georgia All-Star and North Georgia Wrestling Alliance shows back in the late 80s, decided to put together the global thing, got some investors and put it together. And, ESPN loved it. They loved having wrestling on a strip show, which was every day. And that's tough when you think wrestling once a week. We're doing it every day, 5 days a week. And we're recording TV every Friday and Saturday night at the Sportatorium down at International at Katie's in South Dallas. And, but yeah, that's where I was for 90 into 91. And then when the money ran out, it became strictly a Dallas-based promotion. And if you didn't live in Dallas, you weren't on the show. And I live in Atlanta, and so I'm not on the show. But that was a fun time. That was a great education, great experience. Still friends with, everybody. John Horton, Stephen Prazak, Bonnie Blackstone, Joe Pedicino, passed a few years ago, but he was terrific. And then Mark Bagwell and Scott Levy and Cactus Jack and Terry Gordy, and God, we just had so much, and Stan Lane and Jimmy Cornette. And we just had such a great troupe. It was a lot of fun.
How was your relationship with Cornette? Did you always get along with him?
Yeah, always. Okay. Love Cornette. I haven't talked to him face to face or in person. Does anybody talk in person anymore? I haven't in a few years.
Yeah.
But when we would work together, it was great. He was, I don't know if you've ever met him or interacted with him, but he's not putting on a show. That's just the way
I'd love
he is.
to.
He's so fun.
Because me and him, I think on a history level, me and him would connect somehow. It'd be like long lost brothers or something. There are some modern takes of his that, like I understand his certain aspects of certain modern things. I 100% agree with on 100%. And then there's other things I'm just like his.
Well, Jimmy is. I'm 60. I think Jimmy's got me by a couple of years, maybe. Yeah. And it's tough. I don't know how old you are, and I'm not asking, but when you get to a certain age, everything seems to be perfect. If you're a wrestling fan, the wrestling is perfect. If you're a football fan, it was the best talent. If you're a Saturday Night Live fan, that's when Saturday Night Live was perfect. Or music, that's when music was perfect. And then the more it evolves, the more you become this jaded old man and think, it's not nearly as good as it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I'm not that. I think Saturday Night Live is funnier now than it's ever been. Thanks to my daughter, I follow popular music, and I sent her a thing a couple of weeks ago when Chapel Roan was on Saturday night, and I just said, who is Chapel Roan? This girl's fantastic. And I'm so glad you like her. She's great. And so I didn't fall into that trap. I enjoy college football and pro football now more than ever. So I've kind of tried to keep up with the times and evolve when those societal vectors change. But I think a lot of folks, and Jimmy's probably one of them, thinks that wrestling will never be better than it was in 1988. He'll deny that, I'm sure. But,
no, me and Mac feel that way about like 2000, 2001, so it's fine.
And there you go. And there are people in 2044 will say wrestling was never better than it was in 2022. And you're thinking like, that sucks. That's terrible. I don't want Ryback to come back. I'm not going to pop when he walks out.
Why did you of all the random names you had to bring up, he's the only wrestler in my life that I have ever been like, I don't want to meet this guy at all. And actually, Black with you too. So it's like, all right.
I mean, somebody thought, hey, here's a great idea. Let's find a Goldberg that's a foot shorter than the real Goldberg and put him in a singlet that's 3 sizes too small and run him out there and see what he can do.
And also has less athleticism.
Yeah.
Less work rate and less ability to build.
And it's terrible.
Yes.
Yeah, and has no charisma. That should work.
0. Feed me more. I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, it's just, the guy it was like, if he was in WWF in 1986, he would have sucked then too. Like, that's what I tell everybody. It's like, he would have sucked in 86, he sucked in 2013. Nothing changed.
Yeah.
I think that was the worst. That's the worst part sometimes of just seeing these guys that, because, you worked at Global. Global had Jerry Lynn, Lightning Kid, which became X-Pac, and they had all these guys, and Cactus Jack too, all these guys that were ready to go, that were super talent. But you look at WWF's program, and it's just like, and the Warlord's out. T.L. Hopper. It's like, Christ, here we go.
I would so much rather watch Tony Anthony, T.L. Hopper work. I could watch him work.
No, Tony Anthony
for 6 months.
Tony Anthony
never watch Ryback.
Yeah, oh God.
All right, here's the story. Talking about Global and having Sean and Jerry, who were still so young and had done basically nothing except Minnesota Indies at that point. And Joe, to his everlasting credit, heard about him, found him, heard about him from the sheets. Kept reading about, Jerry Lynn and the Lightning Kid tearing down the houses all over the place, brought him in, and they were perfect. They were wonderful. We go to Dallas every Friday and Saturday night for a year to do those TVs. and we stay at the Roadway Inn on International Boulevard, just down from the Sportatorium. They don't have a restaurant. It's a Roadway Inn. I don't even know if those things exist anymore. And there's a Denny's next door. So we would finish the show at midnight on Friday night. Only thing open was Denny's. So we would go to Denny's and we would all grab something to eat because we're starving. So we go to Denny's, and there's this whole troupe. It's me and John Horton and Pedicino and Bonnie Blackstone and Cactus and Scotty and Corny and Stan Lane and Makan Singh and Rip Rogers and this whole bunch. So we come tearing into Denny's, and they're glad to see us. Come on, I've got a big table set up. So we go in there one night, and Sean is there, Sean Waltman, and it is Sean's 18th birthday. So we tell the waitress it's Sean's birthday, and like, oh, we got you covered. We'll bring out a cake. So they bring out this thing, and we have this huge birthday throwdown for Sean in Denny's, and we're taking up a quarter of the restaurant. And Denny's are not small places. It's a substantive building. The other quarter opposite from us is Liza Minnelli and her band, who had played at some shed in Dallas that night. But again, it was the only place open. So in one corner, you've got the global troupe singing happy birthday to Sean Waltman. In the other, you've got Liza Minnelli and her band, rehearsing Cabaret in New York for the next night's show. That's what life was like. I mean, compare Ryback to that shit.
Did you go over to her and go, "Hello, Linda"?
Well, now see, this was before, obviously, this was 10, 12 years before Arrested Development. And I can promise you, there would have been Lucille 2 jokes flying all over the building had it been 12 years later.
Just go over there and just start doing lines from like Arthur. Just
Yeah. That's what you can do. I'll alert the media.
It's just a joke.
I have not seen that movie in so long, but that's a classic. Both of them.
Absolute
the first one
classic.
And the second one were great.
Oh God, it's just it's like the only thing that, because I've always had a thing against Liza Minnelli only because of the fact that Cabaret took so many awards. It was Cabaret and The Godfather were in the Oscars the same year. And Cabaret took like all these awards away from The Godfather. And I was just like, but it's better. Why? Why is this?
Yeah.
It's just, oh God. So, but she was great in Arthur, and of course with Arrested Development. She's kind of turning around, I guess, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure she was selling pencils on the sidewalk there for a while, I bet.
She's just like, that probably wasn't the craziest thing she also dealt with either. The whole global troupe in a Denny's just singing happy birthday.
Yeah, she was probably like, it's Dallas.
Have
some more coffee.
Can I get the moon over my hammy, please? Yeah, thanks.
Yes, exactly. A Denver omelet.
Do you have any funny road stories with Flair?
With Flair, Flair was not so much one to associate with people that weren't in his circle.
That's true.
And he wasn't standoffish. I think Flair at his core is kind of a shy person. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think Flair is comfortable around Arn, comfortable around Sting, Tully, those guys, the people that were tight with him back in the day. But he didn't associate with us, but he would. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you know Jimmy Hart or have ever dealt with Jimmy. Jimmy's one of my favorite people in the whole business.
Never met Jimmy, but love him.
When you would see Jimmy, or when I would see Jimmy, see him backstage, you come in and, you shake hands, you do the whole thing. And I would say, Jimmy, what's going on? Hey, Scott. And I'd say, what's happening with you? And he goes, I'm just floating. Meaning he's, just going from person to person. They're his best friend until he goes to this person. And then he'll forget them when they get fired in 2 weeks. Never heard of him. He's just floating. just floating on top. That was Jimmy. And Flair did a lot of that, but the real core friendships that he had, they were tight. But anyway, all that being said, Flair would float. He would be friendly and nice, and he's a terribly nice guy. I love him a ton. We went to a show, and God knows where. It's the old, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. I don't know where we were. But the Nitro's over, or maybe it was the pay-per-view the night before, and we're back at the hotel. Actually, I'm sure it was a pay-per-view because I was still up.
Okay.
Nitro's, I would go straight to bed and get up and go to work the next day. But so it was probably a pay-per-view. And we were in this really nice hotel that had, the restaurant and the lobby bar. And it had one of these, it's not a corner because it's a circle, but it's like a semicircular booth, but it can hold like 20 people. And the table's in the middle and the booth kind of like swings around and the other end's open where you can get out and go. So Flair is kind of holding court there with a bunch of the guys. And, we come walking in, me and, probably Tony and Madden and whoever. We come walking in and Gene wasn't with us. He was there. That's the setup. Gene comes up to the back of that booth where Flair is. And he says, and we're standing there with Gene Okerlund, me and Gene Okerlund. And he taps Flair on the shoulder and says, "Hey, Nature Boy, can I bum a Viagra? I think I got one of these stewardesses biting." And so Flair is, woo, big Gene. And then he reaches in and hands him a Viagra, and Gene runs off, and we're like, we'll just take an appetizer menu.
Why am I not surprised by any of that?
Well, I can just read. Number one, it's true, and number two, it probably happened every Monday night, and that was just the only time I saw it.
You're just like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
It was like, this can't be happening. I'm used to working the auction barn in Alpharetta in front of 20 people doing TV that airs in 2 stations in Atlanta. Why am I here?
So so when you worked at Global, so did you work in the Sportatorium at all?
Oh yeah, every Friday and Saturday night.
So you did every Friday and Saturday at the Sportatorium. Yeah. Did you work at Center Stage doing Saturday night, or did they move it to another venue by that point?
When Global went under,
well, I was talking about excuse me.
You're at Center Stage.
Yeah, I meant Center Stage in Atlanta when you went to work.
I got you.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
When Global went under, the Georgia show never stopped.
Okay.
When Global was happening, I was still doing Georgia the whole time, and Global goes under or we get bounced out, still doing Georgia.
Yeah.
So me and my friends in Atlanta, we called ourselves the Atlanta Boys. We would go to every WCW show and scribble out results and send them in to Dave Meltzer and Wade Keller and Steve Beverly and Ron Lemieux and John McAdam and all the Sheet guys. So I didn't miss a Center Stage ever once. You can find a guy on YouTube. His name is Tom Green, and not Tom Green that was married to Drew Barrymore.
Yeah,
different guy.
I assume
Tom Green does a thing called WCW Deep Cuts, and he did a short on his Deep Cuts channel about us because we would go to Center Stage and just raise hell like crazy. This is after Global. We would go in there and we decided to really put all of our efforts and energies into Tex Slazenger and Shanghai Pierce, who were ostensibly a jobber tag team from Memphis.
I remember those guys
that came in, and we went to Center Stage, and we decided, these guys bust their ass. They're never getting anywhere. We're going to get them somewhere. So we did. We would make signs, and we started chants, and to the point that they shut down the TVs a couple of times and told us they were going to kick us out if we kept doing it. And we're like, hey, this is like Lindbergh landing at Orly Airport. We can't stop it. it's an ovation. And so we got them over. They were crazy over. You can go watch that thing Tom Green did. He talks about me and Steve Prazak and John Horton and the Atlanta boys doing that for Texas Shanghai. And Texas Shanghai will tell you that we got them renewed and we got them a look by the WWF where they ended up going.
Right.
Because
they ended up becoming
they
the
were
Goblins.
just so over
Yep.
on Saturday night from those center stage tapings. The thing is, they were really talented guys.
Right.
And they just weren't getting the respect we thought they deserved, so we gave it to them. But the bottom line is, I didn't miss the center stage during the whole 3.5 years. Gosh, no, 4.5. Got started in '89, so probably 5 years that they ran center stage on those free shows for the Saturday night taping. Didn't miss one.
Did they what was a better building? Do you think had more aura to it, the Sportatorium or center stage?
Oh God, Sportatorium.
Oh yeah.
I mean, center stage is a good venue. I'm not knocking it,
Right.
but Sportatorium was just historic, and you hear the stories from the late '70s and early '80s from the Von Erichs, and then when the first time you walk in there, you think this is just a really big urinal. That's all this place is, but it's a Sportatorium. Where center stage is just a really nice venue,
right?
But you could pick it up and move it into a different city, and you wouldn't know the difference. Sportatorium, you knew you were in. You were walking on hallowed ground when you walked into that building.
I think Gary Hart said it in his book. He said the building had outlasted its use by the 1950s, and yet it was still promoting wrestling in the 90s.
That's true. Elvis played there. That's what always blew me away is Elvis played Sportatorium several times. And I'm like, Elvis and me. Yeah. Does it get better than that? Why are we both not up on the marquee?
Yeah, that is the weird thing, how because I felt like I worked at a radio station in Hartford, WCCC, and it was actually one of the first stations that Howard Stern really kind of got his big break in. So when I started working there, it was kind of just like Howard Stern, me. Like, it's just somehow we were like, I get it, because it's like you get that connection part of it. It's just like, yeah, we weren't there at the same time, but still, we're still under kind of like the same umbrella, I guess you could say, at least in your own mind. So
working in radio in the 80s, there was a time on WNBC, where it was Howard and Don Imus on WNBC, and they bookended Soupy Sales of all people,
and Wolfgang Jack.
Yeah, Wolfman Jack, not Wolfgang. Wolfgang's the bass player for Van Halen.
Wolfman Jack, yeah.
Wolfman Jack. That lineup, that was like the 27 Yankees. It
really was. Like they talk about that. It's like a murderer's row, and it's just like, Imus, you're pushing the envelope, but then you got Stern on there between Soupy Sales. It's like Wolfgang and Jack.
Yeah, I love hearing studio checks from that stuff. They were so funny. And there was another guy that was around. He was on the Big Ape in Jacksonville, and then made it up to DC 101. Was a guy named Doug Tract, who was the Grease Man.
Oh yes,
another legendary, boss jock that I used to just anything I could do to get my hands on audio checks from those guys. Was just
Steve Dahl too in Chicago. He was the guy.
Dahl, that's right.
He was the guy who came up with Disco Demolition Night.
Demolition Night, yeah.
Probably one of the greatest promotions.
It was Steve Dahl, and then some other guy that was with him. It's gonna kill me. There were two of them. Anyway.
But no, I
old school radio.
It'll never be the same. Like, you look at terrestrial radio now, it's like, oh God, it's all the characters gone from it.
Yeah, even Howard. I mean, I listen. I got Sirius, and I listen to him every now and then. It's just he's an interviewer. He's great, but
it's so weird when he was interviewing like Kamala Harris, because I was like, a vice president is going on Howard Stern's show.
Yeah.
Can you imagine telling someone that 20 years ago?
Yeah,
Like,
and then you say this is the same guy that had, naked mother and daughter makeout game show, and now the vice president is on his show.
That also pretty much brutalized Kathy Lee Gifford in the 90s and forced her into retirement. So, it's just...
She might have deserved that. I don't
know. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to ever interview Kathy Lee on this program, so I guess I can say whatever I want.
That ship has probably sailed.
When did you know that WCW was... it's not long for this planet anymore?
I've been asked that question a couple of times, and the truth is, when we did the final Nitro in Panama City Beach, March 26th, I think.
Yes.
27th, whatever that was. We found out the previous Thursday that we were done. So whatever that Monday, so 1, 2, 3, 4 days before that, we found out that was the end. Up until that meeting, I thought we were still going to find some way to plug along. In fact, we did that Wednesday before that meeting where they brought us all in to the headquarters over there on Log Cabin in Vinings. We did the worldwide taping, and Tanae and I recorded
episode. Yes.
Yeah, we did 2 different versions. One, we'll see you next week. One, this is the end, because we didn't know. And that was a shoot. We didn't know. They wouldn't have worked us. We didn't know. And until that next day, that Thursday, we were still up in the air. So that Thursday, whatever day that was the day we found out that it was over. I was still hoping that somehow Eric could put something together with Fuchsia. And then you had Jamie Kellner, who, let's just say this, thankfully has passed on earlier this year. He killed the company, killed everything to do with it. I know whatever Eric may have been able to do with the backing that he had from Fuchsia Media was undone the minute Jamie Kellner, in his lack of intelligence, he's a moron, killed all the TV. So basically, we were nothing but a house show entity with no TV to build the house shows on. And we didn't make a whole lot of money on house shows to begin with.
Right.
And then he promptly got shown the door and tried to promote gospel music and failed at that. So, but again, it took Jamie Kellner and Brad Siegel to kill WCW, and even they didn't kill it, at least as far as we all knew, we being talent and employees, until the Thursday before that final Nitro.
It's always funny seeing when I saw Brad on that WCW documentary, and I was like, every time he spoke, I'm like, you're full of shit, you're full of shit, you're full of shit. Because it's like every person that was high up, including Eric, has said that he was one of those guys that was kind of just going behind everybody's back and twisting the knife a little bit and kind of screwing everybody over. And I think that he was also another, I don't know if he was the one or if it was somebody else that around that Bischoff says that he confided some information to, and then the night before he got the call from Harvey Schiller to get fired the next day. So I don't know. If it was,
Siegel had some friend of his, I don't know, some fraternity brother or something that worked for the WWF.
That's how they put that deal together.
Yeah, and that basically the allegations are, this is way above my pay grade, but the allegations from the documentary were that connection didn't hasten the demise of WCW, but it seemed to have been worth a raised eyebrow and hastening the purchase of WCW by the WWF.
I think Vince paid 2.5 is the number, or it's between like 2.5 and 4.5.
Yeah, it's an incredibly low number that he made back that afternoon.
He pretty much did. I mean, the Invasion pay-per-view, I'll get to that in a minute.
You have to.
I'm sorry. I just have to ask. But the Invasion pay-per-view they did was the highest selling non-wrestle Big Four pay-per-view that they ever had, 2001.
Sure.
So my follow-up to that is, of course, is the fact that I prefer to call it One Night in Tacoma. That's kind of the way that you could probably like.
Wow.
Like that's I'm not demeaning you, and I don't think that, because I know they offered you a deal and you said no. They offered you and Joey Styles a contract and you said no, and you said you would go in for this with Arn.
Well, that was their counteroffer.
Yeah.
Like, well, how about you just come in and help us do that? I said, okay, well, I can do 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so I did everything they asked me to do.
When did you know they're going to screw the pooch on this whole thing?
When we got when we got to the building, or when I got to the building, everything was fine. Yeah. Nothing gave us the indication that anything was amiss. And it wasn't like there was some grand conspiracy. It wasn't. It wasn't some kind of plot to undo everything. But I can tell you this, when we went, for me, this is just me, when we would do Nitro, our format sheet was sometimes 35, 40 pages. And it was turned landscape on copy paper. It was to get more data. It was the Skittles replay of the week. It was break here, and wasn't a script. The match would just be another line, and it would be 8 minutes long. And it was just so complicated and involved and well produced. And that's what Vince Russo or Eric and everybody else involved in the production would put together. We get to the WWF, it was on one sheet of paper and barely took up half a sheet. And I'm like, this thing is really not all that professionally done compared to what I'm used to. But again, I figure it's a different company. We'll do what we're told. So they tell us what we're going to do. And, they were terribly nice. I'm not going to knock them. They did fine. They were going to bring Arn and I out, and they just said, nobody's going to care about you two, but they'll care about Stacy because she's, 12 feet tall and most of that's legs, and she's gorgeous. And if she walks out, they're going to pop. So it works for me. So we all walked out, and that's exactly what happened. Shane brought us in, and we did the match. And when they being Booker and Mark, when they worked the match, they worked basically a first hour Nitro match. There's nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't the blow the roof off the building. And the part that gets me, and I disagree with, I saw several interviews with Mark Calloway with Taker, where he said that he doesn't believe at all and thinks it's laughable to say that they had kind of submarined the WCW talent and set them up to fail, that he doesn't believe that. Well, he's dead wrong. No pun intended. He is dead wrong on that. And I'll tell you how I know. They put this invasion with me and Arn coming out with Stace to call the match with Booker and Mark Bagwell in Tacoma, a city we had never run.
Exactly.
Ever.
Never ran there.
We did terrible ratings there. Nobody watched us. They didn't know who we were. They didn't care. Right. They were a WWF town. And the next week, we were at, I don't think we were at Phillips Arena. And we didn't even run the Dome. We were at Phillips Arena, which is literally part of the same building that WCW is headquartered in.
Right.
And that would have gotten over like crazy. But they made the call to do it a week early in a building and a city where nobody knew us, instead of our hometown when it would have gotten over. They did, with all due respect to The Undertaker, who's just could not be more misinformed and wrong. they did do everything they could to kill that angle from the very beginning.
I'm also not trying to knock Marcus Bagwell at all. I'm not trying to
Go
knock
ahead.
him.
That's a long line. I love Mark. Stay in touch with him, but that's a long line.
I like Marcus Bagwell personally. I hope he's doing well. I know he's had some trials and tribulations in the past, and I hope he's doing well with that. My only thing that I was going to say was, if you're going to do a WCW championship match, Booker T is in there, obviously. He's the world champion, but also at the same time, there's no bad thing I really could say about Booker T as a talent. There's none.
Right.
Marcus Bagwell, however, was always presented as a upper mid-card to mid-card, he was always kind of or in the second to Scott Steiner, who was a main event talent.
Sure.
Do you think that putting him in that spot as the challenger for that championship, do you think automatically, though, that they're kind of almost right at the gate a little bit trying to demean the championship because they're having somebody that has been presented into a WCW audience as someone that has never really challenged the title before in his career? And they also had other people and I know DDP got brought in as a stalker, which, why? But that's
horrible.
Beyond me, because it could have been DDP versus Booker T as your first match. They could have blown the roof off the place and gotten everybody in Tacoma going anyways, and where people wouldn't have forgot about it. People would have sat there and been like, oh yeah, that was awesome. WCW can hang with the WWE guys. But it's obvious that from the moment that they did that, from the setting, everything, they didn't take it seriously. It was pretty much just like, we bought them, we're going to bury them, and that's it. There's nothing. Why are we going to sit here and try to prop them up and make them equal?
I can only assume that the artist formerly known as Prince Ikea was unavailable to be in that spot. No, but seriously, you're exactly right. And I'll give you, this is before your time, but I'll give you the perfect analogy. In 1987, Jim Crockett Promotions purchased everything that was left
of the UWF.
Of Bill Watts Mid-South Sports. And they were arguably in the discussion of the number 2 company in the country.
Yes, they were.
And when Crockett Promotions bought them out, it was because Watts had no more money, because the oil market had crashed and people weren't showing up and they were going to go out of business. It wasn't because they were some sort of dead creative force. They still had the best talent in the business.
Crockett didn't need to buy them, though. He could have absorbed them. That was part of his problem. That was his financial problem.
And when they did it, and when they did, Dusty was the booker, and the first thing he did was bury everybody that came from Mid-South. Yep. Sting, to his everlasting credit, got over in spite of Dusty. But then you had the Birds. For God's sakes, the Freebirds. That should have been the most over angle in the world. They hot-shotted it with the Horsemen and then forgot about them. Because Gordy saw the writing on the wall and left.
Yep.
And then you had Terry Taylor and Chris Adams and Eddie Gilbert, for God's sakes, my all-time favorite. Even people like, hell, Eli the Eliminator could have done something with him. Savannah Jack, John Tatum, Jack Victory, you had all those guys. Dusty couldn't wait to bury him, just to say he did, because they bought out their competition. And that's exactly what Vince did. And anybody, with all due respect to Undertaker, anybody that says that's not history repeating itself just really isn't that smart. That's exactly what happened. And why people deny it, I understand it, because it makes them look bad, especially considering this. When we were at full throttle in our war, not full throttle to coin a phrase to the pay-per-view name, but when we were at full throttle in the Monday Night Wars, there were Monday nights where we had pushing 10 million people watching both shows.
Right.
And now sometimes they kicked our ass, sometimes the other way around. But there were still 9 to 10 million people watching wrestling on Monday night. when they bought us out and killed us, not only was it not 10 million people, it wasn't even the 5 million that were watching either one of us. It went down to where they would brag about having 2 million viewers on Monday night.
I know.
And that's all I needed to see, that they bought us, killed us, and damn near killed the business. Now, granted, it's come back, but it took 20 years
Yeah.
to come all the way back. And it was all because of the ego, just so they could say they killed us. And by killing us, they killed Watts, they killed Florida, they killed Central States, they killed Mid-Atlantic, everything. They killed everything.
They went into every territory systematically. They went after Vern first, and then they didn't go to Florida until Eddie passed and
Right.
but Mike passed. There were some territories that they respected, especially with if they had a personal relationship with Vince Senior. Vince Junior seemed to kind of stay away from him. But it was a systematic breakdown, and it was so hard, kind of. WCW at the end, because I didn't want to see them go down, because it was like, to me, they were always an alternative.
Yeah, you did. You weren't a big Jason Jett fan, I know.
No. Fire and Ice, goddammit, they got to be tag team champions. No, it's
nice. Wow.
Or a Firebreaker Chip, throw him in there.
It was early '90s. Thank God he was gone by the time. We always called him Fartlighter Chip.
Or PN News.
Oh boy. Nope. I'm gonna pass on PN.
Yo baby, yo. Oh God.
And that was supposed to be, believe it or not, a play on CNN. And they were going to develop a character and a logo for him that looked like the CNN. He was going to be PNN.
I'm sure Ted got a hold of that. It was like,
absolutely right. Like, no, you're not screwing around with my news network.
This is my baby here.
Yeah.
Especially in 91, 92, because CNN, after the first Gulf War, like their ratings were just massive. Like they were, because everybody was watching them during that Gulf War, because you had Bernard Shaw over there in Baghdad just being like, the bombs are literally 60 feet from me. Oh my God.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. And so 91, 92, the last thing that Ted Turner is going to want is going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to do a character and it's going to be PN News. And it's going to be, no, we're not. We're not doing that at all.
Correct.
No one is going to think this has anything to do with my baby here at CNN.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
I noticed that you were part of a project, and it just came back to me recently. There was a documentary that came out, and it was probably about 10 or 15 years ago that I ended up checking out because I was bored, and it was the conspiracy theory of the Bret Hart Shawn Michaels fiasco in Montreal.
Yeah.
And I could have sworn it might have been a Mandela effect or something. Were you a part of that?
No. With Shawn and Bret?
It was like, it wasn't a WWF production. It was an outside
that might
production.
have been part of the documentary. Yeah. Just asking people, was it a shoot or a work?
Yeah, I think that was
the one I always get asked about, and have done a couple, was the one in Daytona Beach.
Oh, the Hogan one.
Yeah, with Hogan and Russo and Jeff and Booker and all that.
Do you have any insight or stories from that would differ from kind of what has already been kind of talked about ad nauseum? Like, do you have any kind of insight on that you may have seen? Because, you got Vince Russo gives his explanation, and then you got the Bischoff and Hogan side of things, and then there's the middle.
I understand the question, and the truth is, if it was a work, they worked us because we didn't know what was coming at all. There's a shot, if you go back and watch that, it was Bash at the Beach.
Yes.
You go back and watch that, there's a shot of us, and they had us wearing these flowery Hawaiian shirts, which I didn't understand, but we did. And there's a shot of us at ringside, and I pick up like some paperwork, and I say something like, well, that's not on our format sheets.
Yep. I think that was when Russo came out.
And it wasn't, because we didn't know what was happening. And I know that I've heard the story that Eric and Vince and Hogan have put out that it was a work, that the whole thing was a work. It went exactly how it was planned. And it may have. Good Lord, I'm not in those meetings. I mean, I'm not. But I will say this, that ended up in litigation, for real litigation.
It did, yes, I remember that.
And having worked in courts for 40-something years, courts are not really big fans of being involved in wrestling angles.
Right.
So if it was a work, they worked the court, and the court would not be thrilled with that. I can tell you from experience. So I would say that if it was a work, they went too far with it because they worked the judicial system. But if it was a work, I think that there's an argument that that's a cover story because it was a shoot and they didn't want to lose the case. I don't know. That's not my theory. The only theory that I've got is what I saw, and we called what we saw. What you hear me and Tony and Mark saying in the commentary is exactly what we knew, which was just what we saw in the ring. So if it was a shoot, it sure seemed like one. If it was a work, it was the greatest kept secret in the history of the business.
Was everybody in the company at that point backstage kind of sick of Hogan's shit?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I need to know. And that's the first time I wanted to be known. That's the first time that I actually swore so far, because I've been tripping. But it's the only word that I could come out with, because you're a respectable gentleman, so I wanted to come on here and be like, all right, clean up my act, not be normal like I usually am, and just because. But I needed to kind of throw that out there just because of the fact of that. That probably made the job not so fun when you have a plan. It's kind of set out months in advance, and then all of a sudden he comes in. That doesn't work for me, brother. And all of a sudden there's tension backstage, and you're like, same as usual. All right.
Well, you brought up earlier on the Who Killed WCW documentary that Vice did, which was incredible. Right. I adored every bit of that. Loved it. But anybody that thinks that Eric killed WCW, or even Vince Russo killed WCW, barking up the wrong tree. And it wasn't the inmates running the asylum. It wasn't Hogan. It wasn't Kevin Nash or Kevin Sullivan. It certainly wasn't Kevin Sullivan. He was wonderful. It was Jamie Kellner and Brad Siegel, and to a degree, Dr. Schiller, but he was just the man in charge. I think he was being worked by his underlings as much as anybody else. But that bash at the beach, we talked earlier about when did it hit the iceberg. That may have been when we hit the iceberg.
Okay.
Not Starrcade 97. That may have been when a bash at the beach 2000 may have been when we hit the iceberg.
Well, because it doesn't get brought up, because everybody looks at the Hogan Sting match as, they look at it, okay, it didn't have the finish that you wanted. 7 months later, though, you're in the Georgia Dome in front of 40,000. Goldberg, clean as a whistle.
People forget
clean as a
that.
Whistle.
They say you never recovered from the NWO angle. The Royal U. WCW never recovered from the NWO. The hell we didn't. We marched through that. We kept it going too long. Hell, it was still going on not long before we went under. NWO 2000 and stuff.
Let's bring it back. No.
We came back with Goldberg, like you said, and sitting sitting in the Georgia Dome. God, was that the night Megadeth was there?
I think that was a year later.
Oh, that was okay.
Yeah,
we had 42,000 people or whatever in the Georgia Dome. I'll tell you a quick story. When we did that Georgia Dome show where we were building up to Hogan Goldberg, I think. Was that right? Was it Hogan Goldberg?
Yeah, it was Hogan Goldberg. Yeah.
And we did WCW Saturday Night from the Georgia Dome. Mike and I were at the Dome. We were on the field, or on the floor where the field is, or would have been. And we're doing our stand-ups down there, building up the show. And it was really fun.
Right.
I wore a pair of Docksider shoes that I had since high school because they were comfortable.
Right.
And they never showed full body shots of us on stand-ups. In fact, they rarely went below our waist doing stand-ups, but they showed us to give you that beauty shot, that gargantuan perspective of Mike and I, these two little bodies in the middle of this cavernous Georgia Dome. Right. And all my wife saw was my shoes. And I said, look at this shot. There's me and Mike. Isn't that cool? She goes, you're still wearing those same god-awful shoes. And I just caught the promo like you wouldn't believe. She's over there laughing now that, because of the literally at that point, 20-year-old shoes I had on.
No, my girl yells at me all the time for still wearing sandals. It's November. It's like I'm comfortable.
I just went and got the trash from the street, and I had a pair of Birkenstocks on when I walked out there.
Well, you live in Georgia. I live in Massachusetts, so it's different.
Good point. Yeah, it was 80 degrees.
I live in an area where it's, you mentioned earlier you were talking about football.
Yes.
I'm sorry about Super Bowl 51. I'm sorry.
It's still, I'll tell you a quick story. In my shoot job, one of the things I did was
Tom says hi, by the way.
There you go. I was an instructor at the United States Courts Academy in Charleston, South Carolina. And I did that for, holy cats, 25 years. And we would, in one of the classes I taught, which was ethics, and I said, we have to be very careful that we don't bring our biases to our job. If you have a bias, and then it would be like, who has a bias? I would pretend every time to catch myself and say, like, who has a bias? Nobody wants to raise their hand. I'm like, well, I got a bias. I love Chinese food. I do. That's like my favorite thing. I have another bias. I absolutely hate the New England Patriots. I hate everything to do with them. And then by that point, they knew I was from Atlanta, and they would start laughing. I'm like, it still hurts. It still hurts. And I'm telling this as recently as last year. And it does. I'm probably overstating it to the guys in the class, but yeah, that still hurts. When we were watching that at the house, it was in the third quarter, and we're up and beating the hell out of them. And I had some friends over, and we had food and watching the game on the big screen. And Casey, my wife, who is not a football person, walks through. I said, Case, we're about to win the Super Bowl. And she says, it's the Falcons. They'll F it up. And sure enough, we were up 20-something points, and she just called it. Yeah, it's the Falcons.
28-3.
Yeah.
In the third quarter. And I was sick, so I didn't go to any Super Bowl. I did not have any Super Bowl parties. I did not, because I had like the flu or something. And the last time I had the flu was the Super Bowl 42, and the Patriots played the Giants, which the David Tyree.
Yeah, the undefeated season, right?
Yeah. So if you're bringing up past trauma, I got to bring up past trauma.
That's fair. That's traumatic. I'm with
you. So the last time I was sick for a Super Bowl was that. So I was just like, oh, that's not a good omen. And then midway through the third quarter, I was just like, oh. So my girl was in New York at the time. She was at a bar visiting with her friend. And she was telling me, she's just like, they are partying like it's New Year's here because you guys are down. Like they cannot wait until the game's over because they want to see you guys lose so bad. And then it just things start happening. And I did not sit down the entire fourth quarter. I'm just yelling at the TV. I'm just because I'm thinking I'm helping. You know, I'm like,
it was your fault.
Yeah, exactly. It's my fault. Yes. I've been on that side. I've been on that side though too, where it's like you think everything's going your way. I mean, I'm a Red Sox fan too, so.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get there eventually. I don't know about, it's not going to be this year, but we've got a good coach, and Cousins has shown signs of brilliance this season, but not consistently. But maybe we've got a good core. We'll be all right.
Did you want to get Belichick? Because that was the rumor coming into this. Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sure he wanted to be.
That was the rumor.
Who wouldn't want to be Coach Cousins and have Ray McLeod and Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson, that core.
Yep.
But no, I think we've got Raheem Morris. He's a great coach. I'm glad we have him.
It's a winnable division too.
Supposed to be going to Dallas. That's the story.
I've heard Dallas. Giants is still there. Giants, I think, is still a possibility because he has the connection there. He's always had a. My thing is, I think he'll end up at the Giants, the Cowboys, but there's got to be some things written for Jerry. If Jerry gets involved,
I think that's the one reason he wouldn't go.
Yeah,
because Jerry would have to give up, that GM control, and because Belichick won't do it without it, and Jerry, won't own the team without it. So there's the old Gordon Soley immovable force and whatever object cliche he used to use.
Well,
don't write off Jacksonville. I think he could end up in Jacksonville.
Well, it has something to do with wrestling, because I guess we could bring that up now.
Okay.
But not bring it up, but more or less just kind of, I guess I could start my kind of angle into with this. But do you think Bill Belichick wants to work for Tony Khan?
That's a good point. That's a really good point. But again, does he work for Tony and Shad Khan, or does he want to work for Jerry Jones? Now, granted, working for the Mara family is a night off compared to working for either of those folks. But who's he got in New York? He's got Trevor Lawrence, who's still a good quarterback in Jacksonville. I think he could do wonders in Dallas, but he would lose his mind working for Jerry Jones.
I think he would too, and I think Jimmy Johnson will probably tell him, "Don't do it."
Oh, of course, absolutely right.
So
would Barry Switzer. So would Jason Garrett.
Just
all
don't
the guys.
Do you know what's been going on with the current product in AEW? Do you have friends down there to kind of tell you what's kind of gone on down there to maybe get some insight? Nothing.
Not really. I'll be honest with you. My contacts with AEW are really, really, really limited. I haven't even watched the show in the last few months. It's difficult to watch because it seems like, like an indie show where it's, if you didn't come to the building last month, it doesn't matter, because this show is self-contained from the minute the doors open until the final bell. That's it. You don't need to know episodic storylines from one week to the next. And that seems like what AEW is doing. They're not doing it. I would be remiss if I said they're not doing any long-term booking. They're not doing booking. They're booking match to match to match instead of week to week to week or month to month to month. And that's gonna end up hurting them, because this, anybody in the business knows this, is kind of the old, it's a marathon, not a sprint stuff. But this is the perfect example where you remember back when Superstar
Blade said
Graham won the WWF title back in 78, 77 and lost it in 78 to Backlund. When he won it, Vince Sr. told him when he was going to lose it. And it was 13 months later. He was that far ahead. He had laid everything out, knew what he was doing. AEW, sometimes I think they're still putting matches together as the show starts. And are still doing it as the show's going on. It just has that. It doesn't make it bad television, and that might be something that the business has evolved to that's left me by. So I'm not going to say it's bad.
Right.
It's just not something that I enjoy. I want to be engaged and care about the character and know why this finish that they're doing in this match is a callback to 2 weeks ago when the finish was reversed. I like those storylines. And it doesn't seem like they're doing it. They're just booking match to match to match instead of planning things out for weeks or even months in advance. That might not be fair.
I think it is fair just because of the fact it's just they're on major network television. They were able to get back major network television in a place that really when I heard they were going to Turner, I was like, really? Like, I was almost stunned just because of the fact I figured they would have gotten out of the wrestling business so long ago and they would have just been done with it because they never really were happy with WCW when they were on TNT and TBS in the first place. So having them there come back, it was like, all right. And then a lot of people have compared it to WCW. I have a hard time comparing it to that because to me, it's felt like a better produced Ring of Honor or even some of the other independent shows that were in the, like Impact, TNA, things like that. I think they're better produced, obviously, but I get that more of a vibe from them of just a glorified kind of indie group instead of just a major promotion in the United States.
I think that's exactly right. I think that analogy is spot on. They seem like they're aiming to be number 2 and succeeding.
Yeah, I mean, but the way do you feel like the way that they've kind of conducted themselves over the last 5 years in interviews and their whole kind of pompousness at certain points, that they're kind of getting that karma that they have kind of now in the last couple of years because business has kind of gone the other way. WWE's on the rise again. They're getting bigger media deals where you have a whole roster now that they're going to these arenas and they're looking at the hard cam side and they're seeing tumbleweeds.
Right. And
you got to wonder if that locker room is demoralized internally because you're not playing in front of a packed house. Some of those guys that left WWE when full house every night, the business is good, everybody's talking about us, and then you're going to AEW. Yeah, you're going to make a couple $1 million more, but then it's just like, oh, there's no one here.
and any wrestler, any talent, from an announcer to a ring announcer to a Nitro girl to a worker to a manager, you feed off of the folks in the building. It helps. And it's not some kind of esoteric theoretical position. It's absolutely true. When you've got 18,000 people in a building and not one of them are sitting down and not one of them is silent, you're pumped. You can't help but be. And when you've got 1,800 people in a building that seats 18,000, it does impact your product. Your product as a talent. It impacts your performance. Even if you do everything you can to keep the performance at that high level. I'm going to pretend there's 18,000 people here. Well, then you're going to have to keep your eyes closed because you can look and see they're not there.
Right.
Forget that you can't hear them. There's an analogy that I use with my wife a lot when we're talking about other stuff. Not obviously I don't talk wrestling with her, but I always use what happened to us in WCW. And again, I'm making up places and dates, but stay with me. Say on August 1st, we're at the Rosemont Horizon for Nitro, and it's jam-packed, 19,000 people, and not one of them are sitting down, and it's insane. The next week, we're in St. Louis, and again, smaller building, there's only 16,000, but it's full, and they're still just crazy loud.
Right.
And the next week, we go to Dallas, maybe 300 empty seats, but otherwise pretty full, and they're still raucous. And then we keep going, and it gets smaller crowd, but they're still loud as hell. And eventually we end up at the Orange County Civic Center in Riverside, south of LA, in front of 900 people in a 2,000 seat building, and they act like they want to be anywhere else.
Right.
So the analogy that I use is it's heading for Orange County. You know, we're at the Rosemont right now, but we're heading to Orange County. And that's what happened to us. That exactly, maybe not those cities, but it did end up when we were in Riverside at the Orange County Civic Center, a small hall, and it was half full, and those people were bored out of their mind. And that was when you could see things were not going well. And I don't know that AEW is heading toward Orange County, but they better be very careful, or they could easily find themselves on that slippery slope.
They just had to cancel a Saturday night taping for their show Collision.
Right.
They were in Columbus, Ohio. I think it's the Nationwide Arena there. I think it's like a 15,000 seater. They had to cancel the show because they only sold 1,100 tickets and a setup for about 2,500.
Holy moly! Wow.
That's where they're at. That's where
it sounds like they are on their way to Orange County. They're pulling into Southern California as we speak.
It's hard because I'm very hard on them, but I also try to be realistic about it too, because it's just, you can't come out of the gates storming the castle and thinking you're going to be automatically noticed and that your product is automatically the best when you're getting all these guys that some of them, yes, have worked for national promotions. You got Jericho, you got a few others, but Kenny Omega, no one really knows him past the people that watch New Japan. People know who Cody Rhodes is because he was on WWE the last 5 years. The Young Bucks, they really don't know. Again, Kenny Omega, they know who Jericho is. And the list goes on and on of people that they know. And the problem is that they come out of the gates like they were stars. And it's like, but they don't know you here. Like the fans that know who you are watching the show. You're trying to get more, you're trying to get that piece that WWE has to come to you and watch you. And they failed to do that. And
they want to transcend the culture that, like Kleenex and Band-Aids, those are brand names, but they've become so ubiquitous, people think that's the product. Hand me a Kleenex. Well, that's a brand name for a facial tissue. Hand me a Band-Aid. That's a brand name for a bandage.
Yes.
WWE is now what people consider wrestling. I guarantee you if Jericho or Matt and Nick or Omega or any of those guys, Moxley, show up somewhere and say, "What do you do?" "I'm a professional wrestler." "Oh, the WWE?" "No, AEW." "What is that?" You know, they've transcended the culture to where they are now professional wrestling, not a professional wrestling company. They are professional wrestling, and that's a hard shell to pierce for AEW or Impact or hell, New Japan, any of them.
How was because we haven't really talked about, we talked about Eric. How was your relationship? And also, can you also, because you said that you didn't think Russo really killed WCW, which I really don't either. I think some of his creative decisions, it's hard with Russo because it's like there's some times with him, it's like he comes out with some stuff. I'm like, all right, that wasn't bad. And then there's a lot of stuff though that I'm like, yeah, that didn't miss. That was a miss. That didn't hit. Yeah. You know, and I think that's like that with anybody as a creative person. It seemed like though with you, he kind of had a good rapport with you because you went on to work with him again in TNA and then Ring of Glory. Yeah, and that's funny how I got that discovered in the last couple of years. I didn't even know that existed, and then some YouTube creator did like a complete kind of a review of it, and I was just like, I didn't even know this existed. Oh, Scott Hudson's doing this.
Well, it was Ron Simmons too. That's what made that fun. I got to work with him.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Did you know him when he worked in WCW too, or well, he was already out of the door by that point, I think.
Simmons, no, I didn't meet him until honestly, I played high school football against him.
Oh.
Yeah. That's why I went into broadcasting. But no, yeah, he was great to work for. I've worked with him a couple of times at some of these StarCast shows. He's just incredible. What a great guy.
One of my favorite actual interviews that Kevin Nash has done, like the shoot interview, was one that you did with him. I think it was during Wrestle Reunion, one of the Wrestling Reunion shows
in Tampa. Yeah,
yeah, and he went into in depth about his partying days. I think the spring break episodes of Nitro, and I've never laughed so harder in my life about a wrestling story.
It was probably Panama City Beach and then South Padre Island. That's where we did those spring break episodes. Oh boy, those are great places.
Oh, I saw a flyer, and it was actually for the last WCW Nitro Couple of Vila, and I guess it was $30 you can get in, and it was all you could drink. I would have been hammered by 4:00.
Well, you'd have been in good company.
Did you do any? Was there an after party after that whole thing? Like, was there, or did everybody kind of go to their room? Like,
I don't know, and I'll tell you why. So we do the show, and we only do an hour and a half.
Yeah.
The last hour and a half is Raw, simulcast.
Yep.
And when the show is over, for us, when Nitro ended and it became a simulcast, the show was over for us. We were done. We weren't coming back. That was it.
Yep.
So we were staying in a hotel. I think it was a Holiday Inn, or I stand to be corrected. I can't remember. But we were staying in a hotel that's basically part of Club La Vila. You know, they're the same campus. And so there wasn't a matter of getting your bags. It was just basically walking down the hall from the club to your room. And Tony comes up to me. It's Shivani. We're all saying our goodbyes backstage. And Tony comes up and says, "What time is your flight?" Meaning Tuesday morning, because he was part of the group and we would always catch the first flights out. Because I'd go to work and be back at the office at 8:30. And I said, "Oh, it's, like 6 a.m. or whatever." And he just said, "You got your bags?" I said, "Yeah, of course." He goes, "Let's go." So he had his rental car, and we both threw in his rental car and drove back to Atlanta from Panama City Beach. And, we both had just lost our jobs. I had a real job, so I was going to work the next day.
Yeah.
But he didn't. And so he was going to have to start all over at, whatever age he was, late 40s. And, that's a scary place. And so we drove back, and you can imagine me still just a mark that couldn't believe I was ever allowed backstage at a indie show, much less on the air in WCW. And so we drove back and just swapped stories and talked about what we enjoyed during our time working together, and what was good and bad about the business. It was just about a 5-hour master's class in how to be an announcer and what about the business. For me, I'm sure Tony was just hoping I'd keep him awake, and I did.
Well, plus 2 different positions, considering the fact that you were going home to your real job, you got to work in the next day, and he was in an uncertain future at that point.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it probably took him about 2 hours to find a new gig, and he went to work for WSB Radio in Atlanta and became part of the Georgia Bulldogs broadcast team and did minor league baseball, and so he was fine.
Yeah, and I was hard on Shivani, I think, towards that end, just because I feel like I wasn't the only one, though, too. There was a lot of wrestling fans who were just like, God, he almost looked like a Vietnam vet. Like, he just looked like he was in PTSD constantly, just going through war stories. And because you just saw him at the end on camera, and he was just like, ugh. I feel good for him, though, the last 5 years that he's kind of been able to kind of get a second act and kind of finish things strong. Because I feel like he kind of got a lot of you guys got hammered, I felt like, on the production side of things, just because everything that was going on really wasn't your fault. Everything that was going on, it wasn't even the talent's fault, really. You just were up against this organization that just didn't fly in their portfolio. So they tried to do everything they could to just try to demean it.
That's perfect. And that's why I think hanging the Who Killed WCW on Vince or Eric is kind of disingenuous, because when TV is taken away from you, when the promotion of the product is taken away from you, there's nobody on earth that can make, and I keep talking about the artist formerly known as Prince IK because it's such a weird gimmick, but Mike Hammer's a great talent. But,
not the maestro?
Or the maestro, Robbie, yeah. But, we could have made any of that work, but we weren't given the opportunity because they just hated everything to do with wrestling. What Jamie Kellner said was he didn't like wrestling, and the only thing he disliked more, and I'm paraphrasing, was wrestling fans. That's when I realized I had no use for the man at all, because they spend real money. They may not spend it on Rolex watches and Land Rovers and, Jared, but they spend real money on whatever they spend money on, and just go sell those advertisers and say, hey, look, no, Rolex, this is probably not the vehicle for you, but you, Pabst Blue Ribbon, we got your hookup right here. Come on, sponsor the pay-per-view. And he just wouldn't even try.
Is it
laziness?
Really, what he's doing is knocking all sports fans too, because really,
of course,
it's the same clientele that gets UFC, same clientele that gets boxing, same clientele that probably gets the football, the college football, Major League Baseball, all of that. So, and you're also working for a network that for years was the home base for the National Basketball Association. They also owned in their portfolio, they had the Atlanta Hawks, I think, at that time, and they had the Braves. So it's like, you're not only knocking professional wrestling, but you're knocking, I feel like, sports as a whole at this time, because it's the same. I wouldn't say that it's the same, but I'd say that it's very similar, because people that watch wrestling and watch football, they drink Miller or Bud Light. Like they're not drinking Cavassier or something like that. Drinking like regular domesticated beer, and that's it.
I'm proud to say that my next beer will be my first. I am not a beer guy, so.
Oh, okay.
No offense to the Pabst Blue Ribbon people.
That's fine.
Still around.
I completely understand. It also answers questions too of like, you really weren't much hanging around with like Flair or Bobby Heenan.
No, I didn't try to tap into Nature's Viagra stash at the hotel bar. Not really my scene.
Do you believe the Halle Berry story with Flair?
I haven't heard the Halle Berry story. My interest is piqued though.
Flair has said on his podcast, I think when it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago, that and the timeline works because she was married to David Justice. And I guess when they went through that divorce, she was kind of on the rebound, and that's when Flair says that it happened. Apparently, lawyers got involved, their publicists, and said, no, that didn't happen.
Oh, boy.
But at the same time, it's still one of those stories of just, I kind of want to, I hope to believe it just because of the fact that it's, Ric Flair. Come on.
That's as close as I would ever get to her, is to say that I got to work with Flair, and Flair, that's fine by me. Good for Nate.
Is he the best ever? Do you put him in the category of the best ever?
In the 20-something years since WCW went away, the requests to do podcasts like yours have kind of gone by too. And that's fine. That's the way it goes. But when I get asked to do it, I get a lot of those who's on your Mount Rushmore questions. And as much as I love Flair personally and respect what he did in the ring, I wouldn't put him there. But only because, let's see, Mount Rushmore has 4 guys. He might be fifth or 6th.
No.
But it would be hard for me to overlook. And as a historian, this is where people would, I hear people say, my Mount Rushmore is Hogan, Austin, Taker, and Rocky. Oh my God. No. My Mount Rushmore, and I've put thought into this, and it changes, and every now and then I'll have Flair in there, but I got to start with Luthez,
of course,
in there.
Yes.
And Frank Gotch. No, not Vern. Vern's up there, but Luthez and Frank Gotch would be up there for me, and probably Gorgeous George. And then of the latter day, that's where, I reserve that spot for Flair, for Terry Funk, for Jack Briscoe, for those types of folks. So I waffle a lot, but Flair, I don't think Flair's the greatest of all time, but he's one of the greatest of all time. And I would put him in that pantheon for me.
I think when you said Flair, when you said Hogan, Rock, Undertaker, and Austin in their
no offense to those guys, except for Hogan.
Damn it, Scott! That was a gift for Christmas. I got to meet him.
Oh,
damn it!
Bubble burst.
I was a Hulkamaniac. Come on, Scott, don't ruin it.
I'm sorry,
but I was an NWOite too, so it's fine.
No, as far as what you would see on television and all that, yeah, he was great, absolutely great. I'm not saying that.
Did we have bad story? Did we have bad interactions?
No bad stories at all. Just anecdotal stories that you hear. Just there's a video out there, and I think Cornette may have done it with Brian Last, where all of the lies that he told.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, Harley setting the ring on fire in Kansas City. And that he was supposed to get the George Foreman grill deal. And
I heard, and that he was supposed to also work UFC fighters or Pride.
Right. And that Elvis used to show up at the Mid-South Coliseum to see him wrestle.
Even though he was dead he died before he debuted. I fully admit that, especially too, also with his other controversies over the last decade, that it has. The problem is that Scott, I still look at him as 8-year-old Dan. I still look at him as, this is the beacon of hope, and I mean, he did end the Iraq War in '91 when he did beat Sergeant Slaughter, though. So we got to give him that.
Well, yeah, that was the one where they were so over. They booked the L.A. Coliseum and then had to move it to the Forum.
Not even the Forum, the sports arena.
No, that's right. It was a sport. That's right. It wasn't the Forum. You're correct.
It wasn't even the Forum.
They couldn't even fill up the Forum. The Lakers probably had a game, even though it was March.
The Lakers are just like, yeah, we're not playing. Well, they were a playoff team that year because they played in the finals. So, yeah, because I think it was Bulls Lakers that finals. Holy crap! Look at the time. I've already taken 2 hours of your time.
That's all right.
No,
I've been sitting here so long, I'm paralyzed anyway. So
I did want to kind of try to see if I could get back in because I feel like he's just been like a mute for the last few hours.
No, man, you guys were cooking, so I was like, I'm just gonna stay out of this.
Yeah, I understand that too, but I didn't know if you had anything like follow up because I feel like I've just been talking straight for 2 hours.
No, literally, I think you asked Scott all the questions that I had.
So I was gonna ask about Russo. I was gonna ask about Bischoff and the thoughts about killing WCW. I was gonna ask all that stuff. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna let you guys cook because you guys are on a roll. So
no worries, man.
This is when you have a like-minded podcast co-host. It's just it's very easy.
Because it never happened. I keep waiting for you to say, "Okay, well, let's start." Because we never got there.
No, well, we'll do like an intro. Well, me and Mac will do an intro and outro on a post because it's easier that way. Fine. And it's just I'm also someone sometimes where it's just like I just want to go. And if we do the intro, the outro, it's just like, well, because I have things off the top of my head, and I'm just like, I just want to go with it. And don't worry, I'll make sure to kill it on the intro. I'll make sure that you're put over the top as well. Because
I'm already retired.
Well, no, hey, look, I am. We are thrilled you did this, just because of the fact that. Speaking for myself, at least, I mean, you were definitely someone that back in the day, I was like, I want to be in the position that he is just because of the fact you were knowledgeable and the same way that you talked about it being like, we're all marks. We just want the key card to work, as long as we're in the set, as long as we're playing in the sandbox, it doesn't matter what we're doing. And that was kind of my thought process. I did a little indie work for a couple of years, but yeah, I mean, that was this is the only industry I ever really wanted to work in. I didn't want to do anything else. It was, unfortunately, when I graduated high school, ECW just folded up because my thought process, I was going to graduate high school and then I was going to go bang on Paul Heyman's door and go work for him. Mind you, I would have been bankrupt within 2 years, but still.
That's right. Oh, Paul.
We didn't really touch much on Russo because I wanted to kind of get your kind of perspective on him because you seem to have a decent relationship with him because you've worked with him in multiple promotions and things like that.
Right.
And
right.
I do feel like he gets vilified more than he does where people actually have nice things to say about him. And so, do you have nice things to say about Vinny? I think you do. So
sure, absolutely.
Because I feel like everybody...
I may be the only person in the business that can say I love Eric and Russo, and I think those feelings are mutual.
Okay.
Usually they can be so polarizing of personalities that people love or hate either one. And that feeling is reciprocated from them in the other direction. Obviously, that's what reciprocated means. But I adore both those guys. I would follow them into battle. I'll tell you this. This is kind of a morbid story, but the first night that I did Nitro was the permanent co-host with Tony. We were in Denver, Colorado. It was the night where everybody showed up and they were in the ring and had to turn in their titles, and it started.
Oh, that was the reset. Yeah.
That night, do the show, fantastic show. I get back to the hotel room, and I had done Nitro for a month the previous summer. When, they gave Tony some time off because he needed time off, and they said, Scott, do it. And they had to have Rick Steiner beat me up in Rockford, Illinois to get me off the show and whatever. Mm-hmm. So I get back to the hotel room in Denver, and I call my wife. And I said, did you see the show? Yeah, I saw it. Call your mother. I said, I'll call her, whatever. I'll call her. It's late. Did you hear when I said in some smart ass line, yeah, I heard that. You really need to call your mom. I said, I'll call her. Did you see when, and then some other bullshit happened? And she said, call your mother. Your dad died tonight.
Oh.
And, I stopped down and I called my sister first, and she, told me what had happened, and he had been watching the show. And when we went to a commercial, he was getting up to take out the trash. He walked through the house and get all the little trash bins and going to take the trash out to the street, and had a heart attack and said he was dead before he hit the floor. And so I ran back down to the hotel lobby bar and found Eric. And I said, hey, can I talk to you? Like we were talking before about any time I needed to talk to Eric, there wasn't many, but he was always available, and he was. So we went out into the lobby, and I told him what had happened. And he said, go home. He said, go find, I don't know who it was, the traveling secretary, that they'll, get on the internet, and we'll get tickets and go home. I was supposed to do Thunder the next night too, right, which was also in Denver. And so I first flight I could get out is like 5:30 in the morning, and I get home and go pick up my wife and make it to my hometown that around lunchtime, I guess. And we're working on the funeral plans, and when we get down, the funeral home calls and said, all right, everything's set up. You want to come down and you got to view the body and sign paperwork. And the first floral display that was sent was from Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff. The very first one. So that sounds very sweet, but I still have somewhere that little card, that they attach to the flowers that says, condolences on your loss, signed Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff. And I thought, if I ever really get in dire financial straits, I could probably auction that off.
I think you could easily auction that off, actually, to be honest.
But I wouldn't do that. But that's what kind of guys they are. We were coworkers. Eric was my boss, and Vince was my boss in a different structure. But we were coworkers. We worked together, and I love those guys, and I would go back to work for them. And I ended up being the big boss at my real job, and I managed a staff of 100 attorneys and PhDs, and for the Northern District of Georgia in the federal court. And it's a pretty heady job. And when I got to be the assistant to the boss, which was now 12 years ago, I realized how hard it is to be a leader, to be a manager in a real job environment. This is working in the legal community in the federal courts. There's no room for error. And it made me appreciate more how good a boss Eric was. He was a great boss. And I'm just having to juggle lawyers. He's having to juggle the artist formerly known as Prince Ikea and the Maestro and, Kevin Nash and Paige and Flair and everybody else. So he was a great boss. Great boss.
Scott, do you have any fun stories about Russo on the road or anything like that? Because I know he asked earlier about some of the other stories, but I'm curious about ones about Russo.
Well, I'll tell this story, and it's only tangentially about Vince, but he's a part of it. We were at the Nassau Coliseum, and it was the night that Goldberg speared Vince when Vince was wearing, I think, the Giants jersey, and speared him through the cage into the guardrail. Yep. And as a shoot, gave him a concussion. And Vince was hurt, but, tough guy, not going to sell it. And so somehow in the rental car going back to the hotel, I cannot remember who was driving. Let's say it was Ed Ferrara. I can't remember. I think it may have been Ed. But Ed's driving. Vince is in the front. Vince is in the back seat. I'm in the front seat with Ed. Vince is in the back seat behind me, and Terry Taylor is in the back seat behind Ed. 4 of us. And Terry, you know who Terry Taylor is? Also a fantastic guy. Terry is making, and we're all pumped because it was such a good show, and this is going to change things. And Terry's all excited. He's talking about the show and won't stop. And I won't bore you or embarrass him with the details of what he's saying, but he is making the equivalency of how good it felt to be a part of the company when we do a show like that, to being with a woman doing what would be considered unnatural things, and being very, very graphic about it. And Ed and I are, and in hindsight, it was it. We're laughing about it, but Vince, who has a concussion, is unconscious in the seat behind me. And Terry keeps going on, and it just feels just like, and you can fill in the blanks. And out of nowhere, about halfway into the city from Nassau, I hear Vince, and he cuts Terry off and just says, "Jesus Christ, Terry, will you listen to yourself? Get a freaking grip." And that was the only thing he said during the whole trip. And then he went back unconscious. He just did not appreciate Terry's analogy.
Oh, man.
So, Vince stories are going to be few and far between, because despite the way he comes across in interviews and stuff, he really was just a hardworking guy. He just did his job.
Was that the night that he won the strip? Because you were talking about Nassau when he got the concussion, so I'm thinking.
Yeah, if that was that night, it was that night.
Yeah, because I think that was the famous. I remember in the promo, he's just like, "We're in Long Island, New York, the greatest city in the world." It still makes me laugh.
Oh,
that one comment still makes me laugh. It's been 25 years. The greatest city in the world. It's like,
not even the greatest city on the island.
That's for sure. Mac, is there anything else do you think we should cover?
I mean, like I said, you stole all the questions, so I can't.
You can't blame it on me with stealing.
No. I like that last story. That was good.
That was really fun.
Definitely something I wanted to ask about Russo.
But again, you're not going to hear many funny Vince stories, not from me, or Eric, because they just worked incredibly hard. Now, the funny stories are Gene Okerlund stories.
Oh, please.
I mean, you got Gene Okerlund stories for days. So we would get up in the morning on Tuesday morning after a Nitro, and there was a group of us that always caught the first flight out, wherever it was. Didn't matter. I had to get back to work. They just wanted to get home. But it was Raven, Scott Steiner, Tony Schiavone, Rick Steiner, and usually Gene and probably Tenay. You could always count on that bunch being at the airport. And these are darkened, empty concourses at 5:30 in the morning. I don't know, I'm sure you guys fly a ton, and concourses usually you can't swing a dead cat without hitting 40 people. There's nobody there. So we're sitting in the concourse waiting on the flight, and Gene comes in at 5:30 in the pitch black dark, still wearing his sunglasses. Obviously had been up all night and was there to catch a flight. So he sits way apart from us. And the guy is in the concourse buffering the floor. That little machine that's got the little spinning buffer to shine the floor. Yep. He's doing that, getting ready for the day. And he comes up to us and says, excuse me, is that man over there one of those TV wrestling announcers? And he's sitting there with all of us, doesn't recognize any of us.
Yeah.
And is that man over there pointing at Gene one of those TV wrestling announcers? And I, of course, say, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I was thinking the same thing. I think that's him. And he said, I can't remember his name. I said, you're talking about that guy right over there? There's only one other guy, and it's him. I said, that guy? That's Jerry the King Lawler. Yeah, Jerry the King Lawler. So he buffers his way over to Gene and says, excuse me, Mr. Lawler. And Gene just tips his glasses down and says, you got the wrong guy, pal, and pulls the glasses back up. So the guy buffers back over to me and says, what did you say his name was? I said, oh, that guy over there, that's Bobby the Brain Heenan. And he buffers back over to Gene. And I'm sorry, Mr. Bobby the Brain Heenan. And he says, hit the road, pal, and puts the glasses back on. And the guy just buffers all the way back down to the next gate. He's given up. Gene and I were on, I don't know if you've ever been to Dallas Airport, DFW. The rental car place is like 7 or 8 miles from the terminal.
Right.
So you go turn in your rental, then you get on this shuttle, and they take you straight up to the terminal. It's a really good setup. So Gene catches a ride with me from the hotel. I said, I got a rental I got to turn in. He goes, it's not a problem. So we go, I turn in the rental, and he and I jump on the shuttle. Well, the people on the shuttle don't know me from Adam, but they know Gene. So they're just staring at Gene and whispering, and it's an uncomfortable place. And we're in traffic, and and it's going to be forever. So the people are, yeah, I think that's him. I'm not going to talk to him. You talk to him. And I'm like, I felt bad for Gene. So Gene pulls out his phone, right? And I can look and see that there's nothing happening. And he just puts it up and says, hello? Yeah. Oh my God, well, what happened? Oh my God. But, well, he was a damn good dog. All right. I'll be home soon. And puts the phone back. So now everybody's convinced that they just watched Gene Okerlund get a phone call telling him his dog died. So as we're pulling up to the different gates, people are getting off. They're all making this milk run to Gene. I'm very sorry about your dog, Mr. Okerlund. And Gene is like, thank you. And I'm next to him, tears running down my face. These people are so nice. And they've all been convinced that Gene's dog just died. And that he just found out, and now he's got to go make a flight back to where he's going with a dead dog on his mind and worried about his family. And anyway, Gene Okerlund was the greatest guy. We did the announcers. We had our own dressing room, and usually that was a tour bus parked outside the building because dressing rooms were at a premium. But we were in this one building we were in, we had a real dressing room, and it was nice. And so we were in there, getting ready and stuff. And Gene comes in, fashionably late. And we have been talking about, do you know who Gary Capetta is? Been a ring announcer forever.
Yes.
Gary's a great guy, terrific ring announcer, been around since the 70s. And Gene walks in, and I don't remember who it was. I think it was Penzer. And because we've been talking about Capetta had just written a book. And Gene walks in, and Dave looks at Gene and says, hey, Gene, did you hear that Capetta wrote a book? And Gene tips his glasses again, like, Capetta wrote a book? Yeah, it's called Confessions of a Pitchman. And Gene doesn't miss a beat, and he goes, Pitchman? He couldn't sell a sick whore a bean sandwich. And for the rest of the time I worked in WCW, it was couldn't sell a sick whore a bean sandwich. There was I know I'm getting some of the details wrong on the show and the dates, but it was in 93-ish, somewhere in there. Robert Fuller was in WCW as Colonel Rob Parker, and he was managing somebody. It wasn't Ming, but Sid had turned babyface, and he was wrestling whoever Parker was managing. And I don't remember if the stip was Sid got 5 minutes with Parker if he won or whatever. But after the match, Sid powerbombed Parker in the middle of the ring. Well, Sid, God rest his soul, is clumsy as hell. And Parker's 12 feet tall and weighs 300 pounds. So when Sid gets him up, he's in the damn rafters, because his own height, and Sid's 6'8", 6'9".
Right.
So he's way up there, and Sid's just going to let him crumble and fall. So while he's up there and Sid getting ready to drop him, he shits himself, and he's in that off-white suit and drops him in the middle of the ring and didn't protect him because he was just trying to get him away from him. And so that's obviously what happened when Parker's walking away. You can tell on that off-white suit. Well, they don't say anything about it on the broadcast because I don't think they showed it.
Right.
But they send it back to Gene, who's going to be on the ring entrance ramp with Harlem Heat. And Tony, let's send it up to me and Gene Okerlund with Harlem Heat. And the way back to the dressing room from the ring was you walk beside the ramp. You don't walk up the ramp, you just walk beside it.
Okay.
And so about that time, here's Gene. Thank you, Tony Schiavone, my guest at this time of the current WCW World Tag Team. And there's goes Parker, but off camera. And Gene just looks down at him and can smell him and just says, Colonel Parker, you been eating birdseed? So flash forward to when I'm in WCW working with Gene, I said, Gene, you remember that clash, that Saturday night, that Nitro, whatever it was, when that happened? And I said, and he goes, oh yeah, I remember. I said, you asked Parker if he had been eating birdseed. Why? And he said, a man shits himself on live television. You got to say something. So if I put in my mind, I got 100 other Gene stories. He was the greatest.
You mentioned Sid, and I got to bring it up.
Yeah.
That pay-per-view that I think it was Sin in January of 2001.
Where he broke his leg.
Jesus Christ. Like,
Nasty.
Watching it at home, I'm like, this is terrifying. Watching it from your point of view, you just been like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. I mean, we spend literally hours learning moves, and it might be a Japanese arm drag, but if the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea does it, it's the Raspberry Beret.
This is the most I've heard Prince Iaukeia's name mentioned in at least 30 years.
I love him to death. But, so we work hard to make sure we get all of that stuff right and to get everything over. And then when something like what happened to poor Sid happens, what do you say? He jumped off the rope and landed wrong and broke his leg, and look at it flopping around in there. It's horrible. I know that the story is, and I believe it, that he had asked not to do the move because he was uncomfortable landing on one leg because he's 300 and something pounds. Probably, 340. He's a huge guy.
Gravity doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and your legs aren't meant to take that much, that kind of pounding just straight down like that. But I hated to see that because I like Sid so much, and I don't think he worked a few matches years later, but I don't think he was ever the same after that.
Yeah, well, too, he was already older by the time 2001 took, by the time that happened. So he was already at the tail end in the twilight. So, I mean, it really wasn't.
He just passed and he was 63. So this would have been, he'd have been 40, 41.
Yeah, around that area, yeah. So it would have, he was already at the end, twilight, so to speak. But, he also, if he had a style that the way he worked, anyways, he could probably gone at least another 5 years. So he probably could have got like another good contract or two out of that and not have to retire. Yeah, I mean, I hope that he was able at least to kind of make some type of financial kind of compensation out of that.
Well, the story was he had saved his money.
Okay.
That he wasn't one of those that was living in a hotel paycheck to paycheck, that he had saved his money and had done okay and took care of his family.
Well, he just played softball anyway, so
and I don't know that he had a shoot job, but he may have gone to work doing something. I don't know what, but
I can imagine him being a greeter at Walmart and then being scared to death when you walked in. You're just like, oh my God, he's going to choke slam me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Show me your membership.
He power bombs you in produce. You're like, oh my God.
He could have worked at like Home Depot because he could have reached those top shelves without the ladder.
Yeah.
He just starts walking around with a ladder and just throws it at someone randomly one day. Ah!
Oh yeah, that's the risk you take again.
So let's close this out. But I want to, before we kind of close it out, I do want to get some Bobby Heenan stories because I love me some Bobby Heenan stories.
This did happen, but I've heard other people tell the story, and so I think it's happened more than once. But when it happened to us, we were at, as God is my witness, we were at the Jefferson Hotel in Richmond, Virginia, I think. And, we always get there crazy late, because the show doesn't end until midnight or 11, then we got to find our way back. And by the time we get there, it's midnight, not much is going on. The hotel restaurant might still be happening, we hope. But we walk in and Bobby, and again with a buffer, I don't know what it is, but the guy that's got the buffer thing going on the lobby floor, Bobby walks over to where the buffer guy is and wraps his foot around the cord that's plugged into the wall. And this is like some 40-foot cord, so he can plug in one place and buffer the whole lobby, right? And then immediately trips himself and starts taking bump after bump after bump all over the hotel lobby floor, pulling the buffer out of the guy's hands who had like headphones in, and all of a sudden he's buffering, all of a sudden, whoop, and the buffer goes over there, and Bobby's rolling around with the buffer, doing like a Abe Jacobs Kiwi leg roll around the hotel lobby. And he, gets himself free and is working the cord and the buffer and gets himself out and throws the buffer over there and gets right at the clerk, the check-in clerk, and just goes, "Reservation for Heenan?"
He must have been a trip.
He was just great. Whatever you think Bobby Heenan is, he's better than that.
Okay.
No, he was a very nice guy, was nice to me, was a mentor because we did a lot of work together, great advice about the business, about life. And obviously he wasn't like crazy funny, like just hanging out. He just was really very smart.
Right.
But nothing but good stories about Heenan. I miss him a lot. I mean, hell, miss everybody. We've lost so many. It'd be easier to say who we haven't lost than who we have.
It's a tough industry because it's just, there's been so many people that either we follow as fans or there's people that we've worked with in the past that just, unfortunately, it's a part of life. But at the same time, it seems like in wrestling and being a wrestling fan or working in the industry, there's a lot of more of that. It's slowed down a lot now. Like, it's not as bad as it was. but 20, 25 years ago, it seemed like there was a good period of like 5 or 10 years where it was like every week someone was dying that like under the age of 60.
It kind of started with Brian
Pillman?
In like 97. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And I think what happened with Chris Benoit was when everybody kind of woke up.
Yeah.
And there have been tragic, 2 young deaths since Chris, but not nearly with, in the rapid succession that, after Brian and before Chris. That kind of woke everybody up.
Well, there was the Brian Pillman one, and then like 6 months later, and he was in WCW. It was Louis Spicolli.
Right.
So so those two like within a period of 6 months, and then it just seemed like right after that, it was like a giant decline of every other week. You're hearing about somebody. You're like, what? Wait, like,
yeah,
he's 35.
Yeah,
and it's just, and it's just. I'm glad that the industry.
You look at people like Rude and Davey Boy and Kurt Hennig, only because they had been around for so long, but they were very young. They were. You think, oh, okay, well, Kurt Hennig wasn't that young. Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was young.
I mean, he wasn't like 75 years old.
No.
So they were all so young, and then people like Mike Awesome and Canyon. Gosh, and there's just so many, just sad to see. And all those guys from Texas, but that was those guys died years ago. But again, it was sad to lose all of those folks. And that's one thing I was telling you before we got started here. I had done an interview with a grad student who was doing some research in sports media and interviewed me. And he had done research into me and was asking me questions from somebody that didn't really know who I was, which is way better, because you do get a lot of what's Sting really like, oh, okay, well, he screwed you right.
I did not ask that.
No, you did not. That's what I'm saying. But this is somebody that really doesn't follow wrestling and just wanted to know about being an announcer in general. And one of the things he said was, as you look back on everything, do you have any regrets? I said, oh, absolutely not. It was the greatest time, a lot of fun. I said, there are some regrets I have, like I wish I could go back and tell Owen not to do the rappelling stunt in Kansas City. And I wish I could go back and call Benoit every day for 3 weeks before June 2007 and make sure he's okay. That kind of stuff I regret, but that's all hindsight. And that kind of made me again relive how many guys we've lost.
The Benoit thing had to have been tragic on two ends because you probably knew Chris, and probably dealt with him quite a bit, and then Nancy too on top of it because she was with the company. Yeah. So that I can only imagine the mental. Yeah, it's a dark subject. I hate to even.
When everything really, when you were talking about like every week, it seemed like somebody was dying. Way too young.
Yep.
This is not a secret, and it's what you could imagine. There were, we would have these, what Disco Inferno used to call catering talk, where we would all sit around in catering and talk about the business. And this would have been in TNA, where I was when all of that was going on. Of gosh, who's going to be next? Who's going to be dead? And we would not take bets or anything, but we would say, well, I don't like the way so-and-so handles themselves, and they're doing way too many recreational drugs, or they're on too much gas and not taking care of themselves, drinking too much. And so we were like, okay, well, yeah, you're right. It's probably going to be him. He's on the list. Out of all of that, the one name I can guarantee you nobody ever said was Chris. Nobody.
Yeah.
And of all things, all of the people that were on the list are all still alive. We didn't get any of them right. But that's what made it so eye-opening. Was that, Chris was the normal one. You go back and look at that footage of just how tore up he was when Eddie died on that episode of Raw. He was just a man that had lost his friend. He was just a normal guy, but something really came, unscrewed up there, and I hate it. I miss him, miss Nance, and that's one of those things I would give anything. People, I want to go back and kill Hitler. I want to go back and save President Kennedy. I want to go back and find a way for Owen to still be here and Chris to still be here.
You're not the only one. You're definitely not the only one. I think that those guys, especially, because I was a huge Benoit fan, and since the events of 2007, it's hard for me to go back and look at his stuff. It's very hard.
Yeah. If you can find it, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
they've done a pretty good job of getting it off of legitimate sources, but you can find some stuff.
Well, the network, I'll give the credit to the network. They've removed, you can't search for them, but all the matches, all the pay-per-views, like from WCW and WWE and Raws and Nitros, those are all untouched. So he's still which is fair. But it's still, it's unfortunate. I feel bad for his son, because I know his son wants to get in the business, but I also kind of have that understanding of maybe you should get into another line of work, just because the fact that last name in this industry, he
looks just like it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know if I'm a promoter, I don't want to bring him in, because it's then you got to put on that poster. You got to have his face, and then you got to have his last name. It's dude, no one's gonna come. It's toxic.
He looks more like Chris than Lexus King looks like Brian.
I know. And
Lexus King looks just like Brian.
He does, but yeah. But I look at David and I look at Chris, and I'm just holy God! It's so. Yeah, and I hate to be that guy that's because I'm willing to give anybody a shot, and I'm willing to say, you can do this. But I look at David Benoit, it's just maybe he should get another line of work. Yeah, because it's just one of those things. I don't know if. Do you think he's got the ability to kind of take the name and make it something great, or is it?
If he has a future in the business, and if somebody wants to do it, great. He should put on a hood and work Japan. Yeah. And then come over here under a hood.
Yeah.
And once he got good enough.
It's just, I don't think anybody is ready for that.
No.
I don't know if anybody's going to be ready for that. And that's the hard part, just because, and I'm not trying to take away anybody from him. It's just the fact that
no, this has nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
Other than it was his dad.
That's the problem. And it's just the industry, I don't think, is ready to kind of get over that. And that's something he's going to have to live with. We have talked your ear off almost 2 hours. And it has been absolutely fantastic. You have been one of the best guests we've had on here.
Oh, gosh.
I want to get you on again.
Sure. I got nothing else. I'm out of story.
Would you maybe want to do something next month for Starrcade? Because we got December coming up with Starrcade. And
sure. You know where to find me.
Okay. Excellent. I don't want to take any more of your time. You've already given us plenty this evening. Scott, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys
telling
for
us stories
me.
and the history of WCW. It's been great.
No, it was a great show. Thank you.
We definitely want to bring you back on without question.
Well, I'm honored that you would ask, and I'm more than happy to.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Scott. Have a great night.
All right, guys. All right, you too. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Happy
Appreciate
holidays.
it. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
And we're back. And we have to, again, Thanks, Scott Hudson, for coming on to this program this week. I felt bad for Mac because it was like, I texted you at one point. I'm like, are you okay? Am I talking too much? I'm sorry. I feel like I'm taking this whole thing off.
It's funny because we started a little bit early. I was not immediately ready to start early. So Dan and Scott had kind of started without me. And when Dan texted me that, I was just like, dude, he's flying. Let him fly. Scott was already crushing the interview as I was joining. I listened for a few extra minutes and I was like, I'm going to let him cook. You heard me say it during the show. I'm going to let you cook because really nothing out of the ordinary that I would have asked, you asked anyways. I thought the Russo story that I did ask him for was pretty solid, but those Mean Gene stories, man, and that Bobby Heenan story, just absolute treasure. Scott was tonight, so I'm glad we have him on. In the future, I think we're gonna have him on again, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, great interview tonight. Great job,
fantastic.
By Scott. Loved having him on, even if I didn't get to talk to him as much. That's all right, though. I had fun just listening to him tell his stories.
I came into this sober as a judge, folks. Normally on this program, I partake in a few liberties here and there. Won't be. You just saw it a few seconds ago. That's because I'm trying to play catch up with because the interview we were starting around 7:00 on the East Coast time. So around 5:30, 5:15, I went cold turkey. So I went for a good 4-hour period where I had nothing in my system. And I was able to be sharp, concise. I looked at this tonight as like a presidential debate or something of that nature. I'd like to say
town hall,
maybe. Yeah, it was more of a town hall tonight. It wasn't a debate.
Yeah.
If we ever get Russo on, I think it would be a presidential debate, if anything. Bro, listen, you weren't there. That was 25 years ago, bro. All right, Vince, look, here's the thing. When the fuck did you think that a hand was going to be a justifiable thing for Mae Young and Mark Henry? I wasn't even involved in that, bro. That's how that would go, folks.
Verbatim. I was, we're talking about Russo for a second. I was a little surprised by some of the stuff that Scott did say about Russo, about Undertaker as well. Some of those comments kind of surprised me, caught me off guard a little bit.
I don't think it was negative on Taker. I think it was just negative on his opinion. No. He was right.
That's the thing. I don't think anything he said was controversial.
No.
Or for that matter, not controversial, I guess, too.
Or wrong.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think it was just, like, hey, like, I don't think that's accurate. And, he mentioned that, one night they're here and nobody knows them. And another night, if they had done it that way, everybody would have known them at the next arena because that's where WCW was kind of located. And he's not wrong.
No.
He's not wrong at all. And I thought that was a great tell by him because there are people that feel that way, that like the WCW guys didn't get a shot. And I understand Undertaker's point of view as well, saying like, okay, well, shoot your shot, get over. But it's like, how can you really do that when nobody knows you?
It's also difficult too when you're he's with the company that won the war.
Yeah.
And also too, the boss is the one that says who's going to get television time this week and not. So he made the decision was made. And I mentioned this with Scott. I said, I knew they weren't taking that seriously when it was not a Scott Steiner or a Ric Flair or a Hulk Hogan or a Goldberg that was up against Booker T. It was Buff Bagwell. And I'm not knocking Buff Bagwell. I'm just saying that his place on the card when WCW closed wasn't near where Booker T was.
No, not at all.
Not saying that he was never going to get to that point, because he might have.
Well,
but he was an upper mid card guy. That was it.
Well, let's talk about somebody that we didn't really talk about just real quick in this conversation of WCW guys. You know, look what they did to DDP. They made him the creepy stalker.
If anything, DDP should have been in that spot to put Mark.
Oh, 1000%.
Bagwell actually should have been the stalker, because it would have made sense, because he's a creep. He was a creep for so long. And that, could you imagine with that little fucking hat going in and just going up to Taker and just doing that little stupid pose? Of course, everybody's going to want to see him get his ass kicked. Bagwell should have been in the spot that DDP was in, and DDP should have been in the spot that Bagwell was in. That's how I feel like WCW would have been able to been better, because then you have DDP against Booker T as your main event for WCW Championship match. Then it's perfect, because you got two guys that were champion and a former champion going up against each other, and you're able to get to lure the audience in with that. But no, they didn't want. That's when I knew. And that was also Scott, because he even admitted, he's just like, yeah, it's just, you could tell from moment one that they didn't take it seriously. They didn't care. Right. And yeah, he's right.
He is right. And that was the thing. And when you talked about Bagwell, that was what I thought of too, is that DDP angle when he first came over, and it was with The Undertaker, and he's the creepy stalker. And then after that, he floundered. He barely got TV time after that. And I mean, arguably, he didn't get much to begin with, even that angle, but still, you're putting him with a marquee talent, but you're giving him a really bad kind of storyline. I can't exactly blame the guy for not being able to do a lot with it. It's just, I don't know. Listen, at the end of the day, I think he had a lot of great points. I think, obviously, his stories, I think, for those like yourself and I that come from a little bit older of a generation of wrestling fans, I thought those were great stories about Gene.
Oh, they were fantastic.
Oh my goodness,
they were fantastic. He did because you never know with these interviews, right? Because sometimes you might get somebody on that they're still looking for a job, and they don't want to say anything risque. They don't want to tell stories that, and he had his wife next to him too on the couch, which I was taking a risk there when I was asking him. I'm like, hey, you got any good Ric Flair stories? Because that could have ended a marriage, I guess, if he said anything too risque. But and I'm not knocking Scott. I hope he doesn't listen to this and doesn't think that I'm just making a reference of just like, are you trying to say? No, I'm not. Because Scott seemed like a good and wholesome boy, considering the fact also that he doesn't drink. Like, he's just like, if the next beer that I would have would be my first beer, which that's some strong will, my friend.
Well, you just said he wasn't a beer guy. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, that's impressive. Because 60 years not having a beer. I mean,
yeah, I don't know when, but happy birthday, Scott. Because I know you turned 60 this year, and I'm pretty sure it was recently. So happy birthday.
Yes. Happy belated birthday, Scott. Sorry if we didn't say that.
I don't
we did that now.
We're saying it now, goddammit.
We're saying it now. Hopefully he hears this in post. He's just like, oh, yeah. He seemed to have a good time, though. So I was...
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, when we asked if he'd be available, sometime next month to do something for Starrcade, he was just like, yeah, let me know.
Yeah.
Immediately. Just,
yeah.
Didn't have to think at all. Just like, yep, let me know.
Well, that's the thing. And I think, I just, hopefully it's another guy I could put like in my Rolodex. It's just like, I know somebody that's worked at WCW. One of it. Actually, that's two guys now, because I had one that was a director for WCW, Dan Bynum, who's been on this podcast twice. He also was the director for World Class Championship Wrestling during their heyday between like 82 and 84. And he actually directed the Bad Street USA video by the Fabulous Freebirds. So like that dude's legit. Like he's also in Colorado now, pretty much just running his own AV company, smoking pot, snowboarding. So he's living the life.
Fuck fucking sounds like it. Shit.
It's like you're in your 60s and you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna go snowboard and smoke some pot. It's like, all right, gotta have goals.
I'm jealous.
Exactly.
Maybe not about so much the skiing part, a little bit, not really, but definitely, just a smoking weed and chilling part.
Have you done any snowboarding? Have you done any of that?
No, I've skied though.
I haven't done either. I have not skied. I have not
wanted to try
snowboarded.
snowboarding. I just never did. I don't know why. I think because I hit the skis first, I guess, and then after that, I was just like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing, and I just never bothered to try to learn snowboarding. But yeah, I've skied.
I was always afraid to hit trees because I had the.
All right, Bono, settle down. You knew I was coming. Come on, you knew that was coming.
Play football with Michael Kennedy. Why don't you?
No, it's because I think in junior high I went to a private school and they had ski trips. So I think they had a ski trip every year. And then after that, my parents actually bought me skis because I enjoyed it so much those few times that we went. I took some ski lessons in Blue Hills, actually, in the winter. Blue Hills in Milton, Mass would have like 2 ski trails. So I would do that. And then would go to Lake Wachusett once a year for like every year after that.
Wow, Wachusett.
Wachusett. It was the closest place. Aside from those dinky
minutes away.
Yeah, it really was though. Not minutes, but within an hour at least. I mean, it just made sense. It was
the same
fun.
family that owns them actually bought Polar Beverages.
I wish I could say I was surprised.
Yeah. Well, of course, now Polar has started to explode in popularity because of their seltzer brand. So,
True.
it's funny because growing up here in central Massachusetts, Polar I've always been used to. But now it's like on a national stage, people are starting to get used to them because of their seltzer. They actually got sued by Coca-Cola once, which is hilarious.
Really?
Because Coca-Cola, if you remember in the early 90s, they started using the polar bear commercial. Remember they had the animated polar bear?
Yep.
So Polar got the idea, we're going to do a commercial with a polar bear, but it's going to be with our soda. The problem is that he grabbed a Coke, and then he threw the Coke away, and then he grabbed a polar beverage. Coca-Cola didn't like that.
Can't do that.
So they fucking sued him, which, of course, I'm like 10 or 15. I forgot when this happened. I might have been like 15 or something, and I'm like, Polar used the polar bear first, though, because they're polar soda. So technically, but then, that was before I went to college and got an education in intellectual property and trademarking. So then it was like, oh, that's what they did. But I love how it went from skiing to all of a sudden Coca-Cola suing fucking Polar Soda. Jesus Christ. What have I turned this program into?
I don't know. I was actually just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I know. Next time I'm going to be singing the New England telephone jingle. Didn't do that.
Don't do that.
I brought it up.
Don't.
But I did not do the jingle.
It was like, this is like last week where you just, you put it out there about Safe Light Auto Glass, about me catching heat, and it's just like.
By the way, I wasn't going to mention anything, but now all of a sudden you mentioned it. The heat is subsided.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah,
I've noticed that.
so you're okay in that sense. Plus,
for now,
time heals all wounds, as far as I'm concerned. Shut
I'm
up.
not gonna touch that.
No, no, no. No.
I said I'm not going to touch that.
No. Oh, no, because you know I'm right.
I liked this better 5 seconds ago.
Yeah, we also, I'm surprised you didn't jump in more when Scott mentioned he was a Falcons fan, and I just said, I'm sorry.
Listen,
He must have been laughing.
Oh my God, yeah. You know why it's funny? So somebody for my birthday, which was last month, got me like one of those Sherpa sweaters that I am actually wearing tonight.
Oh, okay.
And it's happens to be a Patriots one. And I literally it was hard for me not to kind of bring it up because I wasn't going to in the first place. But then you started talking about it, and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't right now with this. But at least he was chill about
He was.
18-1. He was chill about that.
Right.
And the kind of
because we had to exchange PTSD stories.
Yeah. No, and I get that.
We had common ground.
Yeah. Listen, I get his gripes. The only thing I was actually going to ask him is, he said that in that story that his wife was the one to be like, oh, it's the Falcons, they'll blow it. And I was going to ask if he blamed his wife. But I also knew she was sitting
She
right
spilled
there.
my coffee.
Yeah, she spilled my coffee. But I also knew she was sitting right there, so I was like, I'm just not going to say anything. Oh man,
he slept. She slept on the couch for 6 months because the Falcons blew the fucking 28-3 lead. Look,
allegedly, we don't know.
I'm kidding. I'm not exactly allegedly. Scott's gonna hear this. He's going, "Is they fucking burying me? No, we're not burying you at all. We're not burying. We're burying ourselves."
Well, burying your wife, maybe if we assume that she was the reason, then yeah, we're burying her.
He definitely didn't blame her. He probably knew in the back of his mind.
I know he didn't.
Yeah, it's just that was. Well, because I look at the Patriots now and I'm just like,
listen,
that was fun.
I thought that Super Bowl was over.
Of course, didn't you go to bed?
I think I still had it on my phone. But yeah, I went upstairs. I went to bed.
Okay, yeah, I do remember that because I remember I gave you a pass. I said I give you a pass. I give my old man a pass.
28-3.
Yeah, I get it because you had to be up for like 5:30 the next morning or something. It was early.
Oh no, I think I called in that day. I forget, but
I don't remember. It was you had to be up early, and I said, you know what,
right.
I'm gonna give you a pass. But. I've never been so like that entire fourth quarter. I did not sit down. I was yelling at my TV. Yeah. I'm pounding stuff at the house. I'm just like, come on. And I think that was everybody in New England though. Everybody in that fucking in this region willed that fucking team to come back. Like literally, it was shit. But it was also security blanket of Tom Brady. Because you're like, there's a chance. There's an absolute fucking chance that they could pull this off. Because normally any ball club on the history of the planet, that's impossible. That is literally impossible. Montana maybe could have pulled it off. Maybe. But it also would have depended on the coach he had. If it was Bill Walsh, he would have done it. If it was George Seifer,
I'm sorry, but the fact that you said couch first just makes me laugh.
Couch.
Is it faux or is it leather?
You can tell I've hit my limit. I'm like, oh God.
I
Because
can tell
focused
that your self-medication is finally kicking in.
because I focus all my energy on that 2 hour
I know.
window, and because I was like, I need to be Mike Wallace, Walter Cronkite. I need to be focused. I need to be sharp. I need to make him think that I'm a peer. And then all of a sudden, as soon as he gets off, how are we doing this? What?
Like that, basically.
Oh, but yeah, what a fucking great show. Scott, thank you again. If you're still listening to this and did not get offended by our burials, even though they weren't.
No, Scott, honestly, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Welcome back anytime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any fucking time. Like, God, I must want to go down to Atlanta now and be like, hey, are we at that point? Can we hang out? Like, no? Okay. Like, it's fun.
That would be fucking hilarious.
It would. It would be interesting that because we talked about it. If getting Vince Russo on here, I could see me getting Vince Russo on here and me getting all amped up and just being like, I'm ready to take it. And then just coming out of it and be like, I love Vince. Vince is a great guy. I could just see that happening.
But I think that's invariably different than
Yes.
interviewing Scott.
No, because Scott, there was legitimate kind of, yeah, I want to be in a spot. Not because I thought I was as good as him or better than him. I just was like, I want to be in his position because he seems like Scott always seemed to me the guy that was just happy to be there, the mark that was like just happy to get a check. And he confirmed to me tonight that he was just happy to be here and was Mark getting a check. Yep. So so I'm glad that like that lived up to that of Scott is exactly the guy that I thought he was, and wicked chill dude, and definitely somebody that I hope becomes a friend of the program, and we can have him on more consistently to tell more stories because I'm sure he's got a wealth knowledge of them. Just the scratch and the service on Bobby Heenan and Mean Gene, and that one Vince Russo story, which I didn't get to hear the question that you asked. I walked into that because I stepped out for a moment to use the restroom.
Well, so it was about the second time you had asked about Russo at that point. So you had stepped away right kind of at the tail end of his answer. So then my follow-up question was, kind of like, do you have any funny road stories with Russo? And he's just like, yeah, not really about Vince, but Vince was a part of it. And then that's when he launched into that story, which, not for nothing, he was right. It wasn't directly about Vince Russo, but Vince Russo is the punchline to that story. And I was forever thankful that he had at least something ready for Vince Russo, right. Even if it wasn't directly related, because, he admitted, he's like, I don't have a lot of funny stories about Eric or Vince, but even the fact that he had one, I was happy.
Right. It was nice having someone on here kind of humanizing Russo too, because I feel like, again, every podcast that guy gets mentioned, he's getting crucified for something. And he may not even been involved in it, but he's still getting nailed for it. And it's just, I mean, Cornette has legitimate gripes, but that's because he worked with him. So I'm not going to.
Well, I mean, listen, that's between those guys. If Scott had turned around and had his gripes too, I would have respected that because same scenario. He's worked with Vince Russo before, and he's done it in some cases in more scenarios than other people have because he worked in Vince Russo's promotion for a while.
Yes.
So if he came in and he's just like, I can't stand him either, I would have respected that. I would have laughed, but I still would have respected it.
Yes.
Instead, he was like, no, I love Vince Russo. Vince Russo was awesome. He was very, very nice to me when I was there, and I had a great partnership with him. I respect that too.
which I respect it. Like, I'm not gonna, because again, it's like
He could lie for the sensationalism is kind of what I'm getting at. And
I
he
don't
doesn't
think
do that.
I don't think he lied about anything tonight.
No, he
At all.
absolutely
He was
did.
100% truthful.
Yeah.
I think Russo, my feelings on Russo is this. It's like, I want Russo to do the program. I'll put it out there. I'll put it out there now. If Russo hears this because his buddy Scott Hudson is on the program, and somehow gets to Vince Russo, Vince, you got an open invitation anytime you want to come onto the program. I will treat you with as much humanly respect as we treated Scott Hudson tonight. We would do that, but also at the same time, we would have to debate a little bit. There's going to be some things that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
There's going to be some things I'm going to want to talk about. Am I going to openly criticize you and call you an asshole and we're going to have a shouting match? I don't think it's going to happen. I'm too old for me to be in a position of yelling at somebody else that, look, Russo was running the number 2 and also a hand in the number 1 promotion in professional wrestling at one given time. He is in a position that I could only dream about being in. And that's the majority of the people that naysay Vince Russo that have never stepped a foot inside the industry. And I worked indies for 4 years, right? Did all that shit, but still, I don't consider that even a fucking like pinky compared to what Russo did. So, I don't know.
And on that note,
it's just like I'm just trying to kind of come off and because, there's enough people that say negative things about enough personalities in this industry. And there's enough of them that just say, oh, that guy's an asshole. I don't know if Vince Russo is or not. I think, I don't know if Cornette is or not. Scott Hudson meeting him tonight, as far as this industry is concerned, is one of the most humble guys and cool people that I have met that has been in a position where he could have come across as, because he's done things in his life in this industry that we could only dream about. But he came off and was able to give us 2 hours of time randomly and be able to tell great stories and give us great insight into this industry. And I am forever thankful for Scott on that, being able to come onto this program tonight and do that. And hopefully he becomes a friend of the program. I think he will. Because
I hope he will.
We're both charming bastards and people can't resist us.
You're goddamn right. And I will actually add this little piece too, just because I thought it was hilarious that he kind of mentioned him. I think it's hilarious that he mentioned Jim Cornette. I really,
of course.
I just thought it was so funny, and the fact that he remembers him and kind of misses him a little bit, I thought was just hilarious, because Dan and I both listen to Cornette's podcasts, and podcasting in general these days, especially with wrestling, there's a lot of different opportunities. You have us, you have Cornette, you have Chris Van Vliet, you have Eric Bischoff's podcast, the 83-week podcast.
JD from New York.
JD's from New York. Yeah, from New York. I guess I need to start hitting the beds too at this point. You have all those different podcasts that, are out there. And I think Cornette is just so hilarious. And, he kind of paid attention to that too. He's like, for us, it's one thing. For, Scott Hudson's generation, he admitted something else. And, Jim Cornette has his opinions about what's going on too. So, it would be funny, I feel like, if, and God forbid if we were able to do this, it would be so great if we did get Scott and somebody like Vince on at the same time, just to hear the banter that they would have since they've known each other for so long.
No, I Scott and Vince on the same show, actually, that would probably be a good way to get Vince kind of introduced, where he's not like, because then he'd feel like he's not going to get attacked or anything like that, because No, and again, Vince, I would not attack you if you came onto this program. Let's face it, okay? You're not Ryback, so don't worry.
That one's got some legs, man. I'm surprised.
What,
I'm
Ryback?
surprised that talking about Ryback's got to have some legs. I feel like.
Well, look, it's I loved it too. How both of us are just like, he would have sucked in 1987 if it was 1987, and he's like, you're right.
I was actually waiting for a Warrior reference from you, which never came. So
No, because the Warrior drew money. Ryback never drew money.
listen, that's true. Yeah,
Warrior, I could say a lot of things about Warrior, but I can also say a lot of things that are positive about Warrior. Warrior has great action figures. He's toyetic as fuck.
Oh my god!
So Warrior is already better than Ryback in that section, and also at the same time, he fucking drew money.
Yeah.
And the Ultimate Challenge, yes, I feel it's overrated as a match, but Warrior and Savage from WrestleMania 7 is fucking great. Yeah. So he's had great matches, something that Ryback has not had in his career. So that means the Warrior is better than Ryback. See, the Warrior didn't have to do anything, and already he's not the worst wrestler in the history of the industry.
I don't even know if Ryback is, honestly, but he's definitely up there.
Oh, no, he's up there. He's in the top 10.
Oh, I agree. That's what I'm saying. I don't think he's number one, but I think he's definitely in the top 10 for sure.
It's hard for me to say who I feel like the worst ever is that I've seen in the ring.
Well,
like,
I think that plays a role, honestly, because I think there are a lot of guys and girls, to be honest, that get in for certain things and then just flounder. And like I'm sorry, like Gilbert was not a professional wrestler, in my opinion. His funny gimmick ripping off Goldberg, and don't get me wrong, I always found it hilarious, but not a wrestler. Shane McMahon, not a wrestler.
No.
I put Santino Marello above all these guys too. You could make the argument he's not really a wrestler either.
Well, look at the Sandman. He was a brawler. He wasn't really a wrestler. But
yeah, but I mean, it was a different era at the time. He didn't really need to.
Yeah, but also Sandman, I felt like as a wrestler was underrated.
He was.
Because everybody's like, oh, he was a terrible wrestler. It's like, nah, he wasn't bad. He wasn't great, but he wasn't bad.
For what they needed him to do, he was serviceable.
And he also had there are also some matches that he's in that are just fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
they're train wrecks, but they're fantastic train wrecks. And that's like, I go back to the triple threat match he had at Barely Legal. I go back to the Stairway to Hell match he had with Sabu and I think Holiday Hell 98.
Believe so.
Just shit like that where it's just, he has the ability to have great matches. So it's like, I can't sit here and say, oh, he was the worst wrestler ever. No, because he had some good watchable matches.
Yeah.
So.
No, he did.
Before this turns into another episode, on top of our Scott Hudson interview.
Say the same thing, yeah.
I think it's time for us to bow out.
I agree.
I'm gonna plug us, which this are always our favorite ending of the episode every time is just to go on and be like, if you want to hear us every week, you're on PWW Talks. Subscribe to us on Diamond Podcasting Productions on YouTube, and also get us on PWW Talks on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you can find your podcasts. Mac, is there anything else you want to close us out with?
Yeah, catch us next week and we'll do a preview of our Survivor Series.
Oh yeah, that's true. That might have to.
We'll probably do it a day early or something.
Probably a day or two earlier. That's right. Yeah, because of course Thanksgiving is next week, which I'm actually going to a restaurant this time for the first time for Thanksgiving, and I'm actually thrilled about it.
I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, it's actually the same place that we went to for my brother's meal after the funeral. So you were there. That was the famous day that
yes, I remember that.
they brought cannolis out, and Dan didn't get a cannoli, so I was pissed off all night.
Yeah, I was not happy about that either. Trust me.
So pissed.
Yeah, I was a little mad about that.
I was annoyed just because of the fact that it's just like, oh, I had to bury my brother and I can't even get a fucking cannoli. Like, come on. It's just that was because it was just the day is shit. It's terrible. I'm already agonizing about everything, and there's cannolis out for dessert, and I never got a cannoli.
Yeah, it's a cigar.
So
We'll get them in a few minutes, and then by the time a few minutes rolled around, they were
and it's just it was just the cherry on top of a really fucking shitty goddamn mountain day, and I know people are just like, he's really complaining about that. Sometimes it's a little shit. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, because you're already your mind is already in the worst place possible.
Okay. So I have an analogy for you just real quick.
Yes.
Just to kind of bottom line this part of the conversation. You've seen Office Space, obviously.
Yes.
Without that cannoli, it's literally like Milton not getting a piece of the cake. It's exactly what it was. And then Milton burned the fucking place down at the end of the movie. So
it's true. And I wouldn't do that to that establishment.
It's not the establishment's fault. It's
not the establishment's
it's everybody
fault.
that was there grabbing a bunch of them at once. But
yeah, Bourrin, fucking asshole.
Yeah, I think
it's like, how do you have a cannoli and I don't? How?
Bringing his plate, an asshole.
Jerk off.
Yep.
It's like,
but yeah. So anyways, tune in next week. We will review or preview, I should say, really, Survivor Series. We should have a better picture of some of the other matches because I really don't.
Who's the fifth man? Who's the fifth man?
Seth Rollins. Come on, man.
It's still up in the air.
It is, but it's going to be Seth Rollins.
It is, and I mean that's the thing. I mean, because there's still that CM Punk kind of hope that it is because I think that would be the really cool, like, okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out.
Paul calls Punk to help Roman.
That'd be hilarious.
That's the thing that, like,
yeah, it's a good point.
That's
the call.
Because then you're like, wow. Because then it's another, and I think Punk too, selfishly, probably wants to be in a War Games match before he retires. So this might be his only window to do it. So
maybe we'll have something to talk about on next week then.
Yeah, we will. Of course, also AEW has a pay-per-view this weekend. So they're obviously going to do something fucking stupid. So of course we'll be talking about that. Yeah. Of course, next week we'll be bringing up something they're going to do stupid. Because
you know what we didn't do this week that we might have to talk about next week as well
is
Netflix streaming problems.
Oh yeah, we might have to get into that.
And I guess what happened during that fight too, maybe.
At least none of us dropped like $80. That's the thing. Like because I look at that event and it's almost like Halloween. It's almost not Halloween, but I could say Halloween Ends because it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of like Hell in a Cell 2019. It's like, we didn't pay 40 or 80, $50 for that pay-per-view. Yeah, it sucks. The ending blows, but we didn't pay top dollar for it. Because being, growing up the way we did, and also not only that, how many pay-per-views did I pay for and you pay for growing up in our 20s?
Too many.
And we walked away. We were just like, what the fuck did I just watch? So it's not like that anymore. That's the way I kind of look at it with the Netflix thing. It's like, yeah, it was shitty, but it could have been a lot worse if we paid a lot more money. So I think that's what everybody kind of has to look at it and say, yeah, we didn't lose our ass completely, unless you bet on it.
Well, you said it on the last show that Portnoy, Barstool Sports, please hire us, by the way.
Please hire us.
Yep. He put money on Jake Paul, and I questioned that a little bit, and all I gotta say is, damn, you were right. You're probably right for the wrong reason, but you were still right.
Yeah, I heard he also bet on Alabama to win the national championship too.
Oh, jeez.
So look, I love Portnoy, but please hire us.
Virus.
Like speaking of Portnoy, because I got how is Frank the Tank doing? If Juan Soto goes to the Mets, that's that's the big question I got to know.
Oh man, I don't.
And also you got to even because of where you work. Are the Yankees and Mets fans going to be able to coexist if Soto does not go back to the Yankees if he goes to the Mets?
I think, honestly, there are people that down there they're fans of both teams, right?
How is that even possible?
Because you have one that's your primary team, but if they go out and the other one's still in,
All
you go
right.
to the other team. It was we talked a little bit about it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we talked a little bit about it last week, where we're talking about like the Cowboys and the 49ers back
Right.
in the 90s, and how looking at the Buffalo Bills being in 4 straight Super Bowls and losing all 4, like stuff like that, like you almost always have a backup team.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at here. So for New Yorkers, it's like, okay, well, I have the Jets, the Giants. Okay, I have the Yankees or the Mets. And you look at hockey, I have the Islanders, I have the Rangers, I have the Buffalo Sabres, you can count the Buffalo Bills as well. There are just so many teams that it's just like, okay, well, I have my backup team like immediately. And it's the team that literally plays like 15 minutes away. Like that's
a couple of boroughs away. Exactly.
Like not even like one, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what it is. It's like they'll do it that way.
And to think that when our grandparents were alive, they had 3 teams in New York. They had the Giants, they had the Yankees, and they had the Dodgers.
Yeah.
And it was crazy then back then too, because it was just they're all fighting with each other constantly. I felt bad for my Nana because she lived in Brooklyn for a time, so she was a Dodgers fan. Then she moves to Massachusetts and becomes a Red Sox fan. I'm like, Nana, you really got the shit end of the stick on both ends, didn't you? I said, you became a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, so you're always jobbing out to the Yankees. And then you become a Red Sox fan, and they're always jobbing out to the Yankees.
Yeah, it was funny because when Chara got traded to the Islanders from Boston, I was just like, all right, well, I know who my second team is. If it's not the Bruins, I'll root for the Islanders. They're also the most local team to me when I'm in New York. So I was like, all right, that's easy. I've been to their previous home ice, not for a game, but for a comedy show. So like it was like a 20-minute drive. So I was like, okay, like this is cool. Like if ever I want to see the Bruins and the Islanders play at the same time, I'll come here. And obviously I never did that, but it was one of those things where again it's like I have my 2 teams. If one is out, they're both in the same division. Basically, I'll just root for the other one. With the Yankees and the Mets, it's a little bit different, but man, if there is a Subway Series, you don't know how nuts these people go. Because it's like, oh, we're better than everybody because both our teams are.
I was rooting for it. I wanted to see the Yankees. Yeah, I was rooting for the Mets just because of the fact that they didn't have a snowball chance in hell in July and August, and then they just went on a run. And I was rooting for like the Tigers too at one point because they went on a run too that was magical at the second half. And of course, the 2 teams that have $250 million payrolls. Yeah, they're going to be right at the top.
Yep. All right, I think we're doing it. So let's close this bit.
All right, people. Thanks for listening. Thanks again, Scott Hudson, for joining us again this week. And we will see you again next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.